My mind is my church. We are one family. Wanting fantasy, love, and freedom. This simple creed is all we need. This simple creed is all we need. The world is my country. To do good is my religion. No prophet, no priest, no Bible for me. My mind is my own church. We are all one human family. Wanting fantasy, love, and freedom. This simple creed is all we need. This simple creed is all we need. What about doing good, peace on earth? Doing good, peace on earth. Doing good, peace on earth. Doing good, peace on earth. We need peace on earth. We need This is my country. This simple creed is all we need. This simple creed is all we need.
Welcome, everyone, to the 2024 Thomas Paine Birthdate celebration. My name is Margaret Downey. I'm the president of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association, one of the co-sponsors of tonight's event. The Thomas Paine Memorial Association is dedicated to educating the public about the life and work of Thomas Paine and to build a monument to honor his legacy. The monument will be built in Washington, D.C. Contact information for the Thomas Paine Memorial Association will appear in the chat and within the closing credits slideshow. I am hosting tonight with Thomas Paine Memorial Association board member, Dr. Christopher Cameron.
Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be a co-host of this event. We open the program with a short slideshow of today's agenda with the names of our speakers and an estimated timetable. We'll try to stay on track throughout the evening, and you may have noticed there's a time slot for a short break around the middle of the program.
Cynthia McDonald sang "The World is My Country," a song written by Dan Barker, the co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. It was a wonderful way to open the program, and we can't thank Cynthia enough for the time she put into that video presentation. To quote Thomas Paine, "The world is my country, and to do good is my religion." That philosophical testimony appeared in his book, The Age of Reason. His words exemplify Thomas Paine's Enlightenment thinking, his belief in the brotherhood of all humankind, and his humanist perspective. But those thoughtful words are also a testimony to his lifelong work. One of tonight's co-sponsors is the Secular Coalition for America. Nina Unque is a communications associate at the Secular Coalition for America, and today she is representing the organization. Nina is also acting as the Zoom technician, and we are so pleased to have Nina's help this evening.
Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Christopher. On behalf of the Secular Coalition for America, welcome to the 2024 Thomas Paine Birthdate Proclamation Celebration. The Secular Coalition is an advocacy group located right here in Washington, D.C. The Secular Coalition for America is a dedicated lobbying organization whose mission is to advocate for the equal rights of non-religious Americans and defend the separation of religion and government. Our website information will appear in the chat and within the closing credit slideshow. Before we begin, I just have a few housekeeping items to convey. This session is being recorded to be viewed on social media at a later date. All participants, except for the presenters, are muted to ensure the best audio quality for everyone. Questions can be typed in the chat feature. And if you would like me to convey your questions later in the program, just send the chat message to my attention. Again, my name is Nena. Your questions will be welcomed after the formal program and short break. This evening, I'll be working with Hyder Shaw as the video technician. You'll meet him later during the social hour. Back to you, Christopher.
Thank you, Nina. To start the formal program, I'm so very proud to introduce a newly named co-chair of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association, Congressman Jamie Raskin. He is not only the co-chair of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association, but also the person behind the efforts to have a Thomas Paine Monument Bill signed into law. It is thanks to the efforts of Congressman Raskin that we are now in the process of securing a Washington, D.C. site to install the Thomas Paine Memorial. Hello, Congressman Raskin.
Greetings, everybody at the Tom Paine Memorial Association. I am so delighted to be with you, even if it's virtual. It's Congressman Jamie Raskin from Maryland's beautiful 8th Congressional District. I'm thrilled about everything you guys are doing for the 2024 birthday celebration, and I love the theme of the anti-slavery work of Tom Paine. Paine was, of course, a precocious abolitionist, as he was a precocious feminist and suffragette, and obviously a precocious champion of the separation of church and state, the freedom of thought, the freedom of speech, strong democracy in America. But I think that his prescience and his courage are best demonstrated by his early abolitionism, which also puts to the lie the idea that somehow people didn't know how wrong slavery was when the nation got started. Of course, people knew how wrong it was, and even Jefferson knew how wrong it was. He said that he trembled for his country when he reflected that God was just. But Paine never owned slaves and never participated in the slavery system, and he agitated against it. And he evoked through his writing and through his speeches the absolute depravity and squalor and violence that constituted the fabric of the slave system. And Paine hated what it did to enslaved people, men and women and children who were abused and degraded by slavery. But he also hated what the slave system did to the slave masters and to the politics, society, and economy of the country as a whole. So You have chosen a very fitting and overlooked topic, and I'm glad that you have done that. This is going to be an important educational moment for the country, and we should make sure that we get it out in all possible channels. And I want to just welcome everybody to a very exciting and illuminating night of activity, and everything related to Tom Paine can uplift and inspire and ennoble us. And I want to thank the Memorial Association for putting this event together and inviting me to say a word or two at the beginning. I am wishing everybody a great and happy new year in the spirit of the great Tom Paine.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman Raskin. It's always a pleasure to host you at our events. We are also proud to have Congresswoman Victoria Spartz as the other co-chair of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association. Congresswoman Victoria Spartz will now welcome you to the event.
I'm pleased to welcome you to the Thomas Paine 2024 birthday celebration. We hope you enjoyed the program. It is my honor to serve as co-chair of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association. We definitely can use more common sense in Washington, D.C. Enjoy.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Spartz. It's wonderful to have you involved. The title of this event is The Anti-Slavery Efforts of Thomas Paine. While much can be said about Thomas Paine's early efforts to point out the immorality of slavery, tonight we'll be concentrating on one particular letter that was written 7 months before his death on June 8th, 1809.
While often seen as a relic of the past, slavery is thriving in the 21st century, with approximately 40 million people worldwide forced into servitude against their will. The most people in slavery today are in China, India, North Korea, Pakistan, Russia, Indonesia, Nigeria, Turkey, Bangladesh, and even within the population of the United States. According to the Global Slavery Index, the estimated number of enslaved people in the United States is just above 1 million. We will put a link to the Global Slavery Index in the chat. Now, these current enslavement facts prompted us to create the Anti-Slavery Efforts of Thomas Paine program, as we recognize the January 29th, 1737 birth date of Thomas Paine. And as usual, Thomas Paine was ahead of his time regarding freedom of thought, democracy, equality, and justice.
During this event, we'll be hearing 4 parts of the letter Thomas Paine wrote to Thomas Jefferson in 1808. Each part will be recited by actor Ian Ruskin, who is famous for his portrayal of Thomas Paine. Ian is also a member of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association. His contact information will appear in the chat and will be shown during the program's ending and credits slideshow. We have synchronized a visual presentation to emphasize the words of Thomas Paine. It was not an easy task to find depictions of enslavement, and we must warn those who are sensitive to truth-telling that some visuals may be upsetting. We consider this program not suited for young children, thus the chosen nighttime presentation.
There will be various speakers commenting after each of the 4 parts of the slave letter. Unfortunately, one of the scheduled speakers could not attend tonight. Teddy Reeves, the curator of religion at the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture, sends his deep regrets for not being here tonight. Thomas Paine's 1808 communication to Thomas Jefferson is called the Slave Letter because the letter was signed a slave. Before we get started, I now invite Gary Burton to tell us how the slave letter was discovered, analyzed, and credited to Thomas Paine. Gary is a Thomas Paine scholar and is the president of the Thomas Paine National Historical Association. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you, Margaret. For many decades, the letter signed a slave sat in Jefferson's collection at the Library of Congress. Several historians tried to determine who the author was to no avail. When the Institute for Thomas Paine Studies at Iona University discovered that someone was offering a prize to anyone who could prove who authored the slave letter, they asked me to provide proof that Thomas Paine wrote it. Upon reading the letter, I knew immediately that it was written by Thomas Paine. Previously, other researchers said that the letter, quote, sounds like Thomas Paine, close quote, but they all lacked the proof needed. I applied the author attribution methodology I helped develop with Dr. Smiljana Petrovic at Iona. We tested the letter against all abolitionist writers of the day, and Thomas Paine decisively won every test. Then the context and content were scrutinized. The circumstances fit exactly for Thomas Paine as well. In the letter, Thomas Paine emphasizes the date of November 30th. It is the very day he arrived in America. The letter's political attacks on William Duane, who was the editor of the Jefferson supporting newspapers in Philadelphia, the Aurora, fit exactly to Paine's criticism of Duane's politics. Criticisms, by the way, that no one else had privy to. The handwriting of the letter fits exactly to Madame Bonneville's, a longtime family friend of Thomas Paine from the time he resided in France. We know that Thomas Paine was dying at the time, and Madame Bonneville was at his bedside as he dictated things he wanted to document before he died. This entire story and the letter will be included in the forthcoming Thomas Paine collected works, scheduled to be published in 2026. A Cornell University Press book is due out this year that will further explain the evidential proof in detail. I'm sure you will be amazed at Thomas Paine's passion to end the unethical practice of slavery. Thank you all for attending tonight's event.
Thank you, Gary. Gary will be available during the question and answer segment of the program, and we look forward to seeing him again. We at the Thomas Paine Memorial Association and scholars of early American history, such as myself, very much appreciate your vital work in uncovering lost documents, correctly attributing anonymous ones, and shedding new light on the life and thought of this critically important founder. And now we present part one of the slave letter delivered to Thomas Jefferson in his last year as President of the United States.
Thomas Paine wrote this letter to President Jefferson a few months before his death. It is one of the last things that he wrote. He saw the topic, slavery in America, to be one of the most important issues facing the country's future, one that could undermine the principles upon which America was built. As a way of controlling his personal emotions on the subject, and possibly as an attempt to disguise his identity, he wrote it as if from a slave. Sir, in looking over Mr. Duane's Politics for Farmers and Mechanics, I was not a little surprised to hear him boasting of his happy country and the specific measures of this government, and decrying all others as barbarous and oppressive. I wrote to him in September last and requested his friendship and desired him to lay before you our exquisite torment and the inhuman conduct of our masters, but I have not as yet heard anything from him. Our burdens are heavy and call loud for justice, call loud for mercy. I therefore take the liberty, sir, to address you myself upon the subject of slavery and ask you a few questions respecting Mr. Duane's politics. What does he mean by this? Young as our country is in the political world, says he, it has furnished a world of useful experience. and that we are, thank Providence, the only nation that has yet profited by our education. If to spit in the face, cudgel in the streets, fight devils, quarrel in the law, make laws and violate them, oppress and enslave mankind, take away all the honest labors and genius of one part of the community to riot upon, and to aggrandize the rest, gamble, drink to excess, wallow in debauchery, violate the chastity of women, betray public trust, waste the funds, deceive the people, belie other nations, enslave their citizens and our own, aggrandize one part of the citizens at the expense of the others, nurse, educate and exercise children in tyranny and oppression, support a tie of the hypocritical priests and rapacious lawyers to lounge and strut about the country, divide the people into superstitious, hostile secretaries, then setting these poor, ignorant people to quarrel in the law one with the other, that they may fall an easy prey to their capacity, and many more vices of a like heinous nature, can be said to be a world of useful experience and a profitable education America can vie with any nation on earth? Yet, with all these vices staring him bold in the face, he has the vanity to say that we are, thank Providence, the only nation that has yet improved by our education, and the impiety to call out God to save his country from the afflictions of war, but above all from the example of England. What is his mighty uproar about England? Was there anything in her example more inhuman, irreligious, or damning than slavery? Is any nation capable of committing a more heinous crime in the sight of God, or more insulting to fellow man? What said Mr. Wilkinson respecting slavery in 95? Why, believing, said he, that a faithful history of slavery with all its consequences would be, of all others, the darkest pages in the annals of mankind. What said you, sir, in 81? See Notes on Virginia. Well then, if, as Willem asserts, Britain has got 3,000 American citizens in slavery on board her ships of war, has not America likewise got in slavery 2 million of the former citizens of Africa? If 1 million of the subjects of Britain are starving in her workhouses, are not 2 million of the citizens of America running almost naked, starved and abused in a most inhuman and brutal manner in her fields and kitchens? If Britain takes away 1/5 of the labor of her citizens for taxes, does not the tyrants of America take away the whole of the labor of 2 million of her most industrious citizens to riot upon? Whatever may be the mode of any government, either civil or religious, says the friend of justice and mercy, if it cannot exist and prosper without affecting the peace and harmony of a neighboring nation, is unjust. Much more must that government be unjust which aggrandizes 1/2 or less of a community at the expense of the other. The monarchies and aristocracies which have been so often decried by politicians as oppressive and violent are states of independence in comparison of that state of bondage in which the American black man is kept.
Hello, everyone. My name is Richard Newman. I'm a professor of history at Rochester Institute of Technology and the author of several books on the anti-slavery struggle in America before the Civil War. And I'm absolutely delighted to talk to you today about Thomas Paine's 1808 anti-slavery letter to Thomas Jefferson, in which he portrays himself as an enslaved person desperately trying to get in touch with the president about the perilous problem of slavery in the United States in the early 19th century. I think this is a really important letter at the end of Thomas Paine's career. It's also an unheralded but really critical letter in the anti-slavery struggle. And I think it shows that people like Paine were acknowledging the power and importance of African-American voices in the struggle for racial justice in America. So what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about the context that informs Paine's letter to Jefferson, and then talk a little bit about some of the introductory parts of the letter from 1808. So first of all, when Thomas Paine writes this letter, it's at the end of his political career, but in many ways it harkens back to his beginnings as an anti-slavery activist in America. The very first thing that Thomas Paine wrote as a political activist, in fact, was an essay on slavery. It was published in March of 1775 in a Philadelphia newspaper, and it was entitled African Slavery in America. And Tom Paine made the very important point that the American Revolution would be defined by the success or failure of the anti-slavery struggle. In other words, if Americans who had talked a lot about liberty and justice and the terrible nature of British oppression did not get rid of bondage, then their revolution would be in many ways a failure. So from a very early stage of his political career, Thomas Paine was aligning himself with the struggle for racial justice. And indeed, he signed this first anti-slavery essay, Humanity and Justice. So this was not just another topic that Paine was concerned about or a movement he joined. He felt it was central to America's standing as a nation devoted to freedom and justice for all. A couple of years later, Thomas Paine backed up his words with deeds when he was serving in the Pennsylvania legislature. He joined a series of other progressive politicians, you might say, at the time, who supported passage of the nation's first gradual abolition law. So in March 1780, Pennsylvania became the first state, not only in the United States, but in the Western world, to adopt a gradual emancipation program. And that slowly got rid of bondage in the state of Pennsylvania. This became a model for other northern states that adopted such laws, like Connecticut and Rhode Island, eventually New York and New Jersey. And in that sense, it helped clear the North of slavery. So for Thomas Paine, this was a really important model of activism. It showed that you didn't need simply to talk about the problems associated with slavery, bondage, racial injustice. You could actually find allies, political, social allies who would support the cause to pass laws that would eventually drain this problem from the American landscape. So much later on, when he addresses Jefferson, I think this model is in his mind. If we get powerful politicians to back some of our social justice initiatives, we can change the world. So for Paine, idealism is the start of his activism, but it's not the finish. He is always trying to back up his ideas with powerful deeds and actions. So as we know, later on in the 18th century, during the 1790s and early 1800s, Tom Paine is in other parts of the world, particularly in France, supporting the expansion of liberty in the age of revolution. He believes that the French Revolution is the next great step in the struggle for liberty, but he's also a supporter of the revolution in Saint-Domingue, which begins in 1791, and it's inspired first by enslaved people who are rebelling against the lucrative sugar trade in the French colony of Saint-Domingue. Eventually, in the mid-1790s, the French government passes an abolitionist edict declaring slavery null and void throughout the empire. So Paine sees the March of Liberty occurring throughout the Western world, and he's a supporter of its abolitionist components and not just its political components in the metropole and the centers of political power like New York City, Philadelphia, or Paris. He believes that you've got to make sure that liberty is an expansive thing and that everyone has a chance to enjoy it and participate in the blessings of freedom. And it's notable that while Thomas Paine is supporting things like the French Revolution and the Revolution in Saint-Domingue, he's clearly paying attention to African-American writers in the United States and beyond who are trying to expand the abolitionist struggle and movement. So it's very clear in his own essay that he writes to Jefferson and some of his allusions to the anti-slavery struggle that he believes African-Americans are central to the struggle for justice that is expanding in many parts of American society. So clearly he's thinking about people like Benjamin Banneker, the free Black activist in Maryland, who's an almanac maker. He's a well-known politician. He's also gaining increasing traction as an abolitionist because in the summer of 1791, he writes directly to Thomas Jefferson and challenges the great revolutionary hero and icon to end slavery and become an ally of the abolitionist movement. So Benjamin Banneker is doing essentially what Thomas Paine will later do, saying to Thomas Jefferson, there's a gap between what you say and what you do as a slaveholder, and you need to get on the side of right by supporting the anti-slavery cause and leave bondage behind. In 1794, another African-American figure, Richard Allen, a former enslaved person from Pennsylvania and Delaware, he works with a colleague, the Black preacher Absalom Jones, to produce a pamphlet that circulated to members of Congress, to white reformers, hopefully to members of the executive branch like George Washington, saying once again that American political leaders need to support the abolitionist cause. So Richard Allen focuses on Jefferson's language through the Declaration of Independence, in particular in his anti-slavery address, saying that the words have already been put out to the world through the Declaration of Independence. Liberty is the birthright of every human being, and so the continual existence of slavery in the United States is a great violation of human rights and the American creed of freedom and justice for all. 1799, a few years later, Richard Allen repeats that claim in a eulogy of George Washington. He found out that George Washington had issued an emancipation will just before his death in December 1799, liberating roughly 100 enslaved people from his family's power. And so Richard Allen wanted to highlight this as a way forward for Southern slaveholders. In other words, if you believe in the power of the ideas of the American Revolution, then you have to back up those ideas with emancipatory actions, just like Washington did. So not only is he celebrating George Washington's emancipatory deed, Richard Allen is challenging American leaders, including people like Thomas Jefferson, to become standard bearers of abolitionism in the early 19th century. So I think all of these things are on Thomas Paine's mind when he sits down and crafts this really powerful letter in the guise of an enslaved person to Thomas Jefferson. But there's a more specific thing at the beginning of the letter that really animates Thomas Paine, and that's the words of a fellow British emigre, William Duane, who's a publisher in Pennsylvania. He prints a newspaper called the Aurora. He is a great friend of Jefferson's, and he writes a pamphlet in the early 1800s addressed to American voters in general and American farmers in particular, in which he says, in the upcoming presidential election between Federalist John Adams and Democratic Republican Thomas Jefferson, there's only one choice, and it's Thomas Jefferson. American farmers, American working people, the great mass of Americans need to support Democrats like Jefferson because they're opposed to oppression and monarchy and privilege and aristocracy, all the things that they allege that the Federalists stand for. So Thomas Paine is really upset when he reads William Duane's words because he says Thomas Jefferson has remained a slaveholder. And so when people talk about privilege and oppression, they ignore the power of racial oppression in America, and they only focus in on things relating to the old world, like monarchy and aristocracy. So what Thomas Paine does in the early part of his address to Thomas Jefferson is he says, you know, I've been hearing all of your allies talk about the power of your political message, that freedom and justice should reign in American society, but they never talk about slavery. So you see in the first couple of paragraphs of the Thomas Paine letter, his reference to this idea that there's a gap between rhetoric and reality, and his enslaved persona essentially calls out Jefferson by arguing that you were once a big advocate of abolition. Thomas Paine harkens back to the 1770s and 1780s when Jefferson was really critical of bondage, and Notes on Virginia, which Thomas Jefferson wrote in the early 1780s. He argued that slavery was a great sin. It was a bane of American society. And then he argued that he thought it was a great violation, not only of political ethics, but of religious sensibilities. He says, this is Thomas Jefferson in the 1780s, "I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just." So Thomas Paine remembers that. And he says, Jefferson, you once believed that slavery was wrong and that we had to do everything we could to get rid of it. And now, as president, as a 19th century political power broker, you're arguing that the worst thing in the world is aristocracy and monarchy and not racial oppression. Well, Thomas Paine's character says, if you think about slavery, it is nothing worse than racial aristocracy, racial oppression. It's a monarchy of race, and it's poisoning America. By the time Thomas Paine writes this letter to Jefferson, there are 1.1 million enslaved people in the United States. Slavery is growing not just numerically, but in terms of geography, spreading into the South and Southwest. Slaveholders in some parts of the nation in the Deep South are becoming more aggressive in defending bondage. Worse still, slavery is growing in terms of economic power, with cotton coming online, joining rice and tobacco as a great American export. So Thomas Paine, who thought way back when he was a legislator in Pennsylvania in the 1780s, that slavery was on the decline, is now alarmed to see that slavery is growing massively in the United States in the early 19th century. He wants to do everything he can to stop its growth. And so he reaches out to Thomas Jefferson as an outraged enslaved person in 1808. I think it needs to be said at the very end here that while Thomas Paine is adopting some of the gestures and language of African Americans, and that might raise some eyebrows today, it's really a tribute to the power of the Black voice in American and Atlantic discourse. Thomas Paine realizes that African Americans have been at the center of the struggle for racial justice. And so what he wants to do in reaching Thomas Jefferson is to sort of assimilate some of these metaphors and words, ideas and symbols, put them together in a really powerful package, and try to bombard Jefferson with them in 1808, because he thinks that there's no other way to really get the president's attention unless you do something like this. So Thomas Paine, in many ways, is trying to symbolize the power of African-American thought, African-American voices, African-American protest in his letter to Thomas Jefferson in 1808. I think it's an inspiring letter if you think about Thomas Paine's long career as a political activist. And I also think it's an inspiring letter if you think about racial justice struggles today. We always need to remember that Black voices are central in that struggle, and we always need to remember that people can become allies to that struggle, no matter who they are, where they are, or what they do. Because as Thomas Paine pointed out many years ago, we all, as Americans, want to live up to our most noble ideas, but sometimes we need a good, swift kick in the butt to get there. So again, I think this is a really important, powerful letter in Thomas Paine's career, and I'm really glad that the Thomas Paine Society is focusing on it here in 2024.
Hello, my name is Mandisa Thomas. As founder and president of Black Nonbelievers, I am honored to provide commentary for part 1 of the Thomas Paine slave letter. My favorite Thomas Paine quote is, "I believe in the equality of man, and I believe that religious duties consist in doing justice, loving mercy, and endeavoring to make our fellow creatures happy." I think this quote mirrors Paine's activism and life appropriately, given his advocacy for African American education and his many writings, including an essay penned shortly after Common Sense in February of 1776, in which he stated in part that African slavery was against the laws of nature and reason. I think it would have been appropriate for Paine to identify himself in the slave letter. However, due to previous controversies, including his criticisms of Christianity and promoting free thought and reason, and being imprisoned from 1793 to 1794 for supporting the French Revolution, it can be understood why he did not. And while he may have realized that there was not much more that he could do at that time, he certainly still had much to say, especially to Thomas Jefferson, who publicly denounced slavery, yet was a slave owner who fathered children with one of them, and whose descendants had to fight for years for their connection to the family. From the perspective of the enslaved, Paine describes two different versions of America. The first, in addressing Mr. Duane and his boasting of his happy country, it is the American dream, which benefited wealthy Anglo-Saxon male landowners and their descendants. The second, in which the enslaved and their descendants endured brutal treatment, were subjected to exploitation of all kinds, and received almost no justice for centuries, especially at the hands of good Christians, is the American nightmare. Such reflections on this American nightmare can be subsequently found in the works of prominent African Americans, including Frederick Douglass's oration, "What to the Slave is the 4th of July," Maya Angelou's poem, "America," Billie Holiday's song, "Strange Fruit," and Malcolm X's speech, "The Ballot or the Bullet." Paine would have been proud. It is important to acknowledge that many American families, corporations, and even educational institutions, Harvard University, for example, benefited from unpaid and largely uncompensated slave labor. That history, along with legal precedents that allowed the injustice to continue well into the 20th century, cannot be unlived. But facing these difficult truths allows us to make new history and do our best work moving forward. The vernacular in Paine's letter resembles an educated white man of the day, and certainly not of an enslaved person, which probably makes him recognizable even in his anonymity. But he does capture the pain and hypocrisy of a country that denounced the practices of England, yet participated inhumanely in the trafficking, exploitation, and brutality of human beings. Perhaps Paine thought that he could finally get through to Jefferson and get him and others to use reason and compassion to understand the horrors of slavery and subsequently abolish the practice. Because if he could see this so clearly, then they should too. I've said this before and I'll say it again. If Thomas Paine were alive today, he might make the same acknowledgments, amend the quoted words to fit our current times, and be standing on the front lines of racial, gender, and other forms of injustice. And that he would also advocate for the legal and financial justice that is due to the descendants of the enslaved Africans in this country, which is something that we at Black Nonbelievers would support along with Thomas Paine as well. Thank you.
Wow. Already in this very first letter, in this part 1, we can see and hear the voice of Thomas Paine. You know, many people aren't always aware of the true character and contributions that Thomas Paine made to the American society. He's actually one of the original founding fathers. And he is so because he was a part of drafting that Declaration of Independence. In fact, it even said on the document itself, it said approved by TP, and TP was the only known name at the time. Right here in the very first letters we see and we hear how Thomas Paine is convicted that the barbarism of slavery is indeed the greatest scar of America. he constantly refers to the sin and the barbarism and the inhumanity of it, which helps us to recognize that while Thomas Paine's legacy can sometimes be controversial, I don't think many people truly see how deeply he felt the plight of the American slave during the 18th century. He was able to really state strongly and from the perspective of a slave, which was indeed smart at the time. You see, this letter was to Thomas Jefferson himself, and they had differing views. And what better of a smart way and manner to allow Jefferson to reflect by embodying the voice of a slave, deeply speaking about the pain and insistent in his language and in his tone and tenor. The passions that he felt, they ignite me. They ignite the passions that I have for activism and for civil liberties, for individual freedoms. He was truly a radical of his time and a champion for those who were enslaved under the hateful system that he knew very well the person that he was speaking to had every ability to undo.
Well, thank you, Richard, Mandisa, and Dom. If Thomas Paine were alive today, I'm sure he would be very proud that his words mean so much to all of you. And now we present part 2 of the slave letter.
Is this the fruits of your education, sir? Is this that specific policy, that frugal and honest policy, which William says renders equal justice to all men and to all societies of men, which leaves no room for anger? Is this, of all others, the specific policy inculcated by religion? Does the happiness and prosperity of a country consist in slavery? Does piety consist in belying a neighboring nation, in enslaving the citizens of another and reducing them below the characters of the brutes? If this is your Christian charity, sir, this your piety and religion, great God, please come down quickly in thy wrath and send thy thunderbolts and dash these sainted monsters into dust. Again, in the midst of all these complicated horrors, Willem has the effrontery to call upon the farmers of this land and upon all the simple, honest, laboring classes of people to look at this happy country and be proud that there is no lord or lordlings to put them from their path of industry, nor to tear them from the fruits of their honest labor and genius. In the name of God, what does William mean by this? Where has he spent his time? In what cellar has he been shut since the year 76? Does he not know, or did he never hear, that the greatest part of all manual labor that is done in the southern states is performed by slaves, and that they in general get nothing for it except kicks and curses, and that their haughty, lordling masters live in idleness, drunkenness, and debauchery, and aggrandize themselves and families at the expense of the honest labors of the unfortunate people? Can he plead ignorance in all this? If not, by what name does he call such men who have got 400 or 500 slaves at their heels, whom they beat, scourge, and abuse in a most inhuman manner, and take away all their honest labors and industry to riot upon? Again, he adds that a nation must be opposed by some overwhelming necessity, some irresistible evil not to be avoided or guarded against, if she can be at all justified in deviating from the principles which ensure happiness, which are the principles of prosperity, which are the founding principles of religion. Do, for mercy's sake, sir, tell us what this country is opposed to that has caused her to deviate from all these principles. Is not slavery and its long train of calamities a presumptive violation of all these principles? What can a nation do more readily to destroy happiness, prosperity, and religion than to enslave her citizens? Is it not a species of every evil which a nation can be guilty of to destroy all these principles? Let us hear what Mr. Wilkinson says. I cannot but consider, says he, the accomplishment of absolute slavery as the greatest evil committed on the stage of this world. Consult upon this subject the weightier matters of the law by a friend to justice and mercy. Slavery is unjust, says he, because it is tyrannical. It is incompatible with equity and civil rights. It is the greatest of all tyranny. Heavy taxes have been complained of as a burden too intolerable to be borne by the unhappy victims of an oppressive government. But the wretched peasant is left at liberty to consult his own sensation of pain and fatigue, and use his ingenuity to pay the exorbitant demands of his oppressor. Meanwhile, he can enjoy at short intervals some delightful interchanges of love and duty with his family without being under the watchful eye of a cruel taskmaster. Laws to be just and equitable should protect the weak and ignorant and diffuse blessings upon all with a liberal hand. Just laws give vigor and proportion to every part of the body, but slavery aggrandizes one part of the community at the expense of the other. Under its pernicious influence, the head grows to an enormous size, while the inferior members are impoverished and wither away. Like some fatal disorders, it not only destroys the beauty of the body, but its first and best principles, its sympathy and harmony. Slavery is unjust because it destroys the rights of women and children. It is a mere state of barbarism in which neither the delicacy and chastity of sex nor the debility and ignorance of little children are regarded. The situation of the female slave is more deplorable and degrading than that of the untutored savage. For little as savages respect the rights of women and children, their women have exemption from labor and protection from insult during those delicate and painful periods which are peculiar to their sex, and their children are instructed in all the knowledge which is by them deemed either useful or ornamental. The degree of servitude to which savage women are bound is trifling in comparison with the task of a female slave. And insomuch as their husband and children reap the fruits of their labor, and in some measure repay it by acquiring a superior skill in hunting and war, their labor becomes rather a pleasure than a burden. But what is it to mitigate the labor of the poor female slave with all the precious burden of her affections at her breast? Slavery is unjust, as it destroys all the physical and commercial distinctions of labor and property. It is a mere monopoly of men and all their abilities and services.
Thomas Paine Letter to Thomas Jefferson, Part 2. Thomas Paine exposes the United States' flawed framing of collective life and calls for a shift away from the comfort of the privileged to an assessment of the nation based on the impact of policies and popular practices on the most marginalized, the most vulnerable. This is a powerful move, one that troubles the dominant narrative of why and how the United States, and in this way disrupts the illusion of a nation grounded in principles marked by kindness, opportunity, and happiness. Paine's letter is a call to honesty, to a recognition of the pain and misery upon which wealth and well-being are built. As he notes, slavery is the greatest evil committed on the stage of the world. His critique is a dismantling not only of the cultural, economic, and political underpinning of the country, but also a confrontation with betrayed morals and ethics, a challenge to the political and metaphysical narratives that have justified such abuse. In both explicit and implicit ways, this letter calls for a reevaluation of piety, or what some label Christian charity, moving away from abstract doctrine and instead focusing clearly on what such piety authorizes as proper treatment of the despised, the enslaved. By centering the realities of enslavement, this portion of the letter points out the ways in which abstraction allows for a disconnect between practice and religious values. Paine, openly critical of religion, points out the limits of theological creeds, but careful attention to the wording also points out the manner in which the secular realm has done no better in that policy, laws, and soft regulations assume a limited group as reasonable and responsible humanity. Others are excluded and used as the raw material for the New World experiment. Be mindful of the questions his secular Jeremiads suggest. What of this country's workings support happiness, and happiness for whom? Can the country continue to ignore the harm, the kicks and curses, as Paine puts it, done to people of African descent? How can such tyranny be ignored if not justified by those who in turn claim religious righteousness? In face of rampant hypocrisy, Paine seeks to expose the lie of well-being and peace that is built on the backs of the enslaved. Happiness, prosperity, and religion are ridiculed and stymied by the very condition of the enslaved. The enslaved are the source of this American dream for which war has been fought. Not long after the smoke of battle cleared, this new country deviated from the principles grounding its revolution. But how could those principles represent anything substantive and determinative for a nation that, from the first arrival of Europeans to its breaking free, steadied itself by holding on to the misery of enslaved Africans? 1776 did not constitute, as Paine reminds, freedom, the removal of lords for all. Taxation without representation is abuse, but it pales in comparison to the worst degrading of humanity in history, slavery. Here Paine calls attention to the well-being of the most marginalized as the standard, the litmus test for national policies and moral and ethical codes. Shadowing every word of this section of the letter is a realization: slavery destroys all and destroys all fully. Perhaps Paine would label such issues the existential challenge that tries one's soul. The body politic, like the physical body, is warped, mutated, and damaged by enslavement, reducing humanity to labor and property. Laws, he reminds his friend Thomas Jefferson, should protect the most vulnerable. With a biting turn of phrase, Paine points out that just laws aid every element of the body politic, and slavery enlarges certain parts of that body while destroying others. Slavery destroys the body politic's sympathy and harmony by dehumanizing people of African descent. Furthermore, it destroys the rights of women and children. Women and children. By not restricting the image of the enslaved to Black men, not confining liberation to a grammar of masculinity, Paine points out that the situation of female slaves is worse than that of any so-called savage, who, unlike so-called refined men of this country, monitor and limit labor and instruct their children. One hears in the words of Paine an important question: who really are the savages? The answer: whites who enslave Africans and their descendants. The letter, imagined as coming from another member of the enslaved community of concern to Paine, provides something of a veil from behind which Paine points out the problem. This situation, the enslaved advocated for by another, should not be tempered by, but rather made more graphic by, our recognition that the most despised are only able to have their voices heard when others speak on their behalf, never able to demand recognition of their humanity by their own force. No, instead, the despised are defended in this case by a privileged white male thousands of miles away. As we celebrate, and rightfully so, Thomas Paine, I ask that we recall that Benjamin Banneker had written Thomas Jefferson in 1791, long before this letter from Paine. Banneker called for a similar attention to the condition of those of a despised color, and he wrote as a member of that disregarded population. Yet, his letter doesn't carry the same weight, so to speak. As smart as he was, despite all he'd contributed to the success of this growing nation, his race colored the impact of his words. The argument, a similar sentiment, would have to be funneled through the social standing of one of Jefferson's own. Still, if we are considerate in our reflections, it becomes clear these two letters, one by Banneker and the other by Paine, are important and striking in their similarity. One speaks out the problem from the first-hand perspective of a fellow of the despised children of Africa, and the other points out the problem from the perspective of one attempting to see the world from the vantage point of that despised population. Banneker called on the best exercise of the Christian faith, and Paine pointed out the hypocrisy that faith sanctioned. Banneker argued for and urged recognition of the damage done by the circumstances of enslavement. And Paine pointed out the hypocrisy of those who enslaved, who denied their happiness was tied to the misery of others. Paine urged a reckoning with what is at stake and what actually is required to more than wish a fair and free nation. Taken together, they make real the nation's situation. There is no space, no perspective, no relationship to democracy that isn't tainted by this inhumanity. Both letters constitute a powerful use of language, of imagery, signs, and symbols. Yet neither change the nature of circumstances for people of African descent. Any meaningful push in the direction of freedom and equality would have to wait almost 60 years, and even that effort would end without much change to felt circumstances. Paine's letter calls us to rethink our posture toward the world, the means by which we assess the world. I gather from his prose two underlying questions. Who have we forgotten? What have we overlooked? Such questions call us to be mindful, to be aware of our position and the degree to which we might benefit from injustice. This is a form of humility that would serve us well, and that would enable us to name the hypocrisy that grounds the nation and continues to justify its abuses. If we are honest about our answers to these questions, it becomes clear the pronouncing of harm, the critique of our social political assumptions is an ongoing process. The descendants of the most disadvantaged named by Paine remain the most disadvantaged, and our delusion concerning the depth of our democracy and the opportunity it affords all is just as false. Religion is problematic, but we must also be mindful of the shortcomings of free thought. After all, Paine writes to Jefferson, not a minister, not a bishop, but one whose free thought allowed for abuse and disregard. Hence, there is a call for humility and perspective in Paine's words, a push against arrogance that sees advantage as a natural right as opposed to a wrong built on the suffering of others. Being mindful of this letter poses a challenge we ignore at our own peril. For whom will we speak? But better yet, who will be able to speak their own truth as a result of our efforts? Circumstances remain dire. Anti-Blackness continues to deform life options when it doesn't kill them outright. Mindful of Thomas Paine and his urgings, what will we do?
Wow, his voice comes on even stronger, doesn't it? In this particular part 2 of these series of his letters to Jefferson, there's a lot of religious inference and ethical considerations being made. You see, Thomas Paine is making the assertion, as the slave, how really slavery in of itself is incompatible with ethics and with civil rights. He calls it tyrannical and a tyranny because it gets to the very barbaric nature of humanity. He really zeroes in on the fact that the unjust nature of slavery, especially its impacts on the rights of women and children, was very, very severe. In fact, I think we can say that Thomas Paine perhaps was one of the first feminists of his time, because he spoke about the condition of the Black female slave. He spoke about how her state and her condition was of the worst of that time, by nature of her sex, being a woman at that time. It wasn't just laboring in the cotton fields. He was aware of that. It wasn't just standing there and cooking meals in the slave master's home. He understood that. He made deep commentary on how, because she is a woman, no doubt, she is prone to the master's whims, and that often did include rape. You see, here Thomas Paine is showing that is a violation of ethical principles, and here he is bringing together the elements of that humanitarian that he clearly was, a believer in the righteousness and the goodness of humanity, and he's combining it with the ethics of political dialogue and political discussion and political completing of freeing people, as the original inception of America was. To be free, it is always set in its stone, then to free. Thomas Paine understood this. He was able to dictate and articulate the condition of the Black female slave. What a wonderful thing to be able to look into these letters and be able to see something not commonly spoken about, but indeed something that needs to be understood as a part of Thomas Paine's remarkable legacy. And really, he was someone speaking up like a Gandhi, right? Like our Barack Obama, and like others who have lived, that have walked the earth and have tried to express and explain to all of us that we are much better than what our actions are showing. Thomas Paine was one of the first feminists, I'll say. Maybe he wasn't perfect, but these words definitely show what was in his heart. He was the first abolitionist, one of the first, one of the many, and not commonly seen as such. And he was also someone who advocated for the freedoms of all. Thomas Paine is proving to be rather deep.
Thank you, Anthony and Dom. The comments have been very educational. I'm impressed with the depth every speaker has expressed in helping us understand why Thomas Paine wrote this letter. We are pleased to present part 3, and you are sure to notice the desperate tone Thomas Paine takes as he becomes irritated with the lack of compassion his fellow citizens have expressed in their daily lives. While Thomas Paine does not use the word reparations, please listen for his plea for back wages and work payments from that time forward.
He who contributes by manual labor to the great stock of wealth must in justice be entitled to some reward. But in vain does the wretched slave fell the forests, clear the grounds, prepare them for seed, watch and cultivate the tender plant, reap down and gather in the harvest, and bear it to the market. Our inhuman tyrants take the whole to riot in drunkenness and debauchery upon, and to aggrandize themselves and families, and we, who have borne the heat and burden of the day, get nothing but kicks and curses for all our labor. With what execration should the statesman be loaded who, permitting one half the citizens thus to trample on the rights of the other, transforms those into despots and these into enemies, destroys the morals of the one part and the amor patria of the other. With the morals of the people, their industry also is destroyed. For in a warm climate, no man will labor for himself who can make another labor for him. This sufficiently proves my assertions and justifies me in saying that a majority of the American agents in the southern states are a set of inhuman scoundrels and ought to be tarred and feathered and tied to the tail end of a dung cart and horsewhipped throughout the country from state to state and forever after banished from human society. If slavery has become so firmly established in this country as not to be avoided or guarded against, or is such a pleasing object as to no longer be odious and irreligious, but a source of happiness and prosperity, it is high time for America to give up all pretensions to liberty and freedom and acknowledge herself at once a joint heir with John Bull. But we have not lost all hopes. We can't yet believe, sir, that you have become so depraved as to be in love with slavery, or have done reflecting upon the wrath of a just God, or that his justice cannot sleep forever. Yet there appears to me something in your administration, sir, very mysterious. What are your reasons for keeping open the execrable market where man shall be bought and sold, which you wrote so warmly against in the year 76, and condemned as a mark of disgrace, of the deepest dye in the Christian king of Britain? I cannot conceive. Is a crime of this execrable nature any more criminal in the Christian crown of Britain than in the Christian executive of America? If not, what are your reasons, sir, for suffering us since 30th November 81 to be trodden underfoot and abused in such an inhuman and brutal manner? Are not our rights as well secured to us by every law of nature's God as any man's in the universe? We think so. And therefore, sir, we consider ourselves entitled to our yearly wages from that very hour, and no man in the government except a tyrant can dispute our demand a single moment. And you may depend on this, sir, that we shall never be reconciled to this government till we get it, and our freedom with it. I think, sir, you can't do yourself or your country a greater honor, nor your unfortunate countrymen a greater piece of justice and mercy than by freeing your slaves and paying them for their yearly wages from 81 to this day. And then, if any slaveholder in America shall hereafter refuse or neglect so to do, let him or them be made an example of, and their heads be hung in giblets for an everlasting moment, and a terror to tyrants and evildoers. Oh, Thomas, you have had a long nap, and spent a great number of years in ease and plenty upon our hard-earned property, while we have been, in the meantime, smarting under the cowhide and sweating in the fields to raise provision to nurse tyrants to cut your throat and perpetuate our own bonds.
Hello, my name is Wil Jeudy, and I am in secular leadership in Texas. I am also a secular humanist and atheist activist. So it is through this prism that I summarize the third installment of Thomas Paine's The Slave Letter, written to President Thomas Jefferson. Paine seems to alternate his message often in this installment, going from anger and resignation to appealing to the better angels of man and back to critique and disappointment. He points out the obvious inequality of enslaved people doing all of the backbreaking work while the slave owners enjoy the riches and sloth that comes with that whole arrangement, if you will. Paine softens a bit, appealing to morals, and then makes a big pivot to anger. He admonishes the inhuman scoundrels who are the slave owners and wants them punished, tarred and feathered, horsewhipped, and otherwise removed from society. A harsh critique by any measure, but those were harsh times. His ire then turns toward America herself. If slavery is embraced by this country, then this country needs to go. You can almost see Paine sneering as he describes the untenable hypocrisy of what is supposed to be a free country, the United States of America, still embracing slavery. He then takes another turn, this time appealing to hope and to the sense of justice of President Thomas Jefferson. He even brings in God and the danger of retribution from God for the sin of slavery. Paine again quickly alternates between admonishing Jefferson's hypocrisy to appealing to the humanity of enslaved peoples to even bringing religion, specifically Christianity, into this argument. He quickly pivots to a plea to justice, humanism, compensation, reparations, and freedom. Seems like he wanted to keep Jefferson on his toes with this letter. He continues his back and forth by saying that it will be an honor for America to abolish slavery, and then in the next sentence, saying that anyone that disagrees should be hung and made an example of. He then ends this segment of the letter by contrasting President Jefferson's fat and easy life with the harsh realities of slavery. Now, my commentary. By some accounts, Paine and Jefferson were close in previous years. He is appealing to that relationship in this letter, trying to use his past proximity to this now president to deliver this urgent message. I want to say two things that I noticed in this segment. One, he used the word tyrant often. That word was often used back then in revolutionary America to describe the British and oppression from that British government. Tyrannical rule was a term used a lot back then, and that term had some insult to it. Number two, I like to put myself in the context of the time when this letter was written, 1809. The successful slave revolts in Haiti had just happened, roughly from 1790 to 1803. Things like that just didn't happen back then. This was huge news to the world, and especially to the slave owners in America, who were sure to be paying attention to their own situation. This made the mention of retribution and hanging and tarring and feathering in this letter even spicier and edgier. If those slave owners, which included President Jefferson, by the way, were wearing pearls, they were sure to be clutching them. A few words about what I learned about Thomas Paine. I'm from Texas, as I said earlier. The history of this state and of this country has a lot of nastiness, much more than we learned in school. So it's refreshing to learn about good history, good people in history, people who I would consider to be on the right side of history, and Thomas Paine is one such man. He was a progressive way ahead of his time: social justice, equity, progressive tax laws, anti-slavery, a superhumanist, if you will. He had his opinions and views, as most of us do, but he proved himself in his writings and in his deeds. He stuck his neck out by critiquing religion and godlike political figures and whole governments on paper, in print, and in public. This was extremely radical and dangerous in those times. He poked the British government and got convicted and had to flee his country. He messed with the French government and got arrested and nearly executed. And lastly, he critiqued the new American government and was brutally ostracized here because of it. All of this advocating for progressive values that we would call humanism today. Now, back to his letter. When you understand what Thomas Paine did, who he was, what he fought for, you get his frustration, his pain, his anger. America was supposed to be better than this. He worked and wrote and dreamed and definitely suffered for it to be better than this. In this letter, he sounds hurt. He did his best to insult an America that embraced slavery so as to make an America that abolished slavery look that much better by contrast. I think that he understood the importance of a healthy moral foundation for a young country such as this one, but he noticed the filth that was there from the onset, which was messing it all up. Learning of Thomas Paine, I'm reminded of two quotes that rattle around in my brain. The first one is, quote, one must always speak the truth as one sees it, no matter what the consequence. For the second quote, James Baldwin comes to mind. He wrote about, quote, earning one's death by confronting with passion the conundrum of life. Both are easier said than done, to be sure. Thomas Paine did both in a most honorable way. I thank you, sir, for the inspiration you provide to fight on and make this world a better place. This man deserves much, much more respect than he has gotten from us Americans, and I'm honored to be a part of the movement to make that happen.
And that's what I call Thomas Paine, the advocate. Now, right here in part 3, Thomas Paine demands for compensation and I would say gives quite a sizable critique of the administration that Thomas Jefferson was leading at that time. Really what impresses me about this is that he immediately dives into how the demand of freedom and proper pay for the slaves it's something that needs to be done, because to not do so, as already seen in his previous piece, it's an oppression. It is a great oppression on humanity as a whole. He really takes it a step beyond, doesn't he? Back in the 18th century, at a time where slaves were not yet free, he was saying, pay them. Let them go free and pay. He was clearly able to articulate and then question the legitimacy, in a way, of Thomas Jefferson's administration, and not in an attempt to degrade or denigrate, but in an attempt to open his mind to see what is it that you're allowing. He states how there's something, interesting, about your administration, and because if you do believe in the things that you once said, he had, as they call, receipts. In 1776, he said, if you believe what you said, then why do you allow the injustice of slavery to continue under your administration? Saying that from the heart of a slave, no doubt must have had some sort of impact. And although Thomas Paine was not alive, it wasn't until 55 years later, that Abraham Lincoln came along and wrote the Emancipation Proclamation that freed the slaves. However, he laid the foundations of allowing that to happen by really putting it on the hearts and minds of our leaders at the time. It is their duty to always seek freedom above all. And really the psychological impact, I feel, is deeply felt in this third part 3. You can see that he is connecting to Thomas Jefferson in a way that allows Thomas Jefferson to reflect on his own actions, his own reasons for how he legislates, or his own reasons for why is slavery something that was allowed and was okay, and why did he have slaves? You see, he was doing multiple things, and I think this is why Thomas Paine is often not understood, because he had the political rhetoric there and the oration there, but he also had the philosophical nature, the understanding of the human being, and how that all threaded together to affect the whole of humanity, America being very new at that time. So really, in part 3, you're getting more of that passion, but uplifted by a more audacious spirit towards Thomas Jefferson, pushing his mind and his ideologies to the limit and beyond, and really invoking that the black man and woman and slave deserve to be, yes, even so, compensated for any work that they were to give at all, something that was not being done at the time. So when I say advocate and feeling his presence, Thomas Paine really wrote with conviction, passion, so much so that we can really say today, when freedom rings in any way, Thomas Paine is likely very happy, cheerful, and proud of the legacy that he laid behind.
Well, thank you, Will and Dom. We now present the final part of the slave letter. And not surprisingly, Thomas Paine foresees that a civil war may be the only solution to put an end to the inhumane practice of slavery. Thomas Paine does not actually use the words civil war, but listen for his call to arms.
It is high time for you, sir, to decide whether or not you will any longer use us in this brutal manner, or adopt us as brethren. For in our opinion, on this single circumstance alone depends the future prosperity or destruction of these states and the safety of your own life in particular. If ever virtue was in danger of escaping the continent of America, it is at this time. For it's an insult upon human understanding to say that there is a single spark left in the breasts of any of Burr's best blood of America, in the priesthoods, or in any of J. Adams' nobility, knaves or fools. There cannot come a stranger among us from any part of the world or the continent, be he ever so virtuous, useful, or well-informed, but at the moment he discovers himself to be a Republican and opposed to this inhuman slavery, he is spurned at and frowned upon by our haughty, tyrannical monsters, and excluded from all society, and called by all the lying damn rascals that their malice can invent. Even the clerks in Congress are of this number, and those who pass for Republicans. And we, their poor unfortunate slaves, are beaten without intermission and trodden underfoot in a most inhuman and brutal manner. Yea, it has come to this, that our lives are no longer safe. For our inhuman masters and overseers publicly say that they would as soon take away our lives as that of a dog's, and that they will do it if we should happen to offend them again, even in the most trifling offense. And the right over wives during those delicate and painful periods which are peculiar to their sex, and which the most savage nations respect, are disregarded by our cruel masters, overseers, and even by our mistresses, and are driven like cattle from their beds in the morning at early dawn, and forced into the fields almost naked, and there obliged to labor in the heat of the scorching sun during the whole livelong day. And many times, even in these painful moments when 8 or 9 months gone in pregnancy, they are beaten down and trodden underfoot in a most inhuman manner. These are painful truths which no person can deny who has ever lived 3 months among the slaveholders. This being our unhappy condition, we humbly beseech you, sir, to lay our cause before the agents of this government, and request them to interpose between us and our inhuman tyrants, or otherwise necessity will ere long oblige us to seek our own safety by taking away the lives of our tyrants and freeing ourselves at once from such inhuman monsters. Oh, rouse up the brave sons of '76, and the children of those heroes who bled and died to free their country from foreign foes and from bondage, that we and our children might live free from foreign as well as domestic tyrants. Don't let their labors be lost. Don't let so much blood be spilt in vain, and so much treasure bartered for a whistle, for Spanish folly, or for British knavery and pride. Oh, rouse, rouse quickly, and snatch your weapons, and unite your strength, and let us banish all tyrants, tyranny, and oppression from North America, and let us, who survive the fatal shock, form but one society, one great family. And since human nature has but one constitution, let there in future, at least in America, exist but one law, that of nature, but one code, that of reason, but one throne, that of justice, and but one altar, that of union. Then might the sons and daughters of America set under their vines and fruit trees and enjoy the fruits of their labor and the friendship of the whole human family. Then might they set down in the joy of their hearts and sing with the birds. A slave.
In this particular part 4, I feel Thomas Paine's love. I feel and I hear his plea. Don't you hear his plea for a unity to exist in America? For a brotherhood that frees the slaves and ends the barbarism that he's been discussing with Thomas Jefferson. We can see here that he emphasizes, again, continuously, the inhumane manner of the way slaves are treated. He also warns that if this is not changed and shifted, he does warn of a political uprising of those who are enslaved. Again, speaking from the voice of a slave himself, he is clearly expressing that if you do not free me, if you do not allow me to be free of the shackles of this human barbarism, to aggrandize one human over another, then I will have no choice but to fight for my freedom, for what is just. He lays out that kind of barbarism only leads to more pain because the just thing, the upright thing, is not being done. Here we are seeing Thomas Paine's full breadth, I would say, of his plea and his vision for America. His vision for an America that truly is equitable and that can supersede the elementary and barbaric and condescending way of living that humans were doing at this time. He was a believer that it can be overcome. Dare I say, he believed that each human has a light, and he was invoking the light of Thomas Jefferson in this particular part 4. You see, with him speaking of that strong imploring he gave towards Jefferson when he said, "Will you join them as brethren? Or will you continue to hurt them and adopt them as slaves?" Not brethren, but as slaves. He was asking those open-ended questions, asking them and making sure that it was clear that Thomas Jefferson could see that there was no way to escape the hateful act, the ultimate sin of slavery. In fact, he commented that slavery in of itself is the worst sin of mankind, the worst unjust doing that one could ever do. He really lived his life in a way that showed conviction for his ideals. And he didn't capitulate any part of who he was for anyone. And that's why he had such a controversial and was a controversial period. You know, he was rational enough to suggest American independence, unorthodox enough to support the abolition of slavery, and radical enough that the same country he helped shape turned its back on him. You know, I want to share something with you that, in my discussions about Thomas Paine and research, really touched my heart about who he was. Through everything Paine did, he had one goal. Notice I'm going to share with you what he said. He reflected in 1806 that every goal he had was freedom. He said, quote, "My motive and object in all my political works have been to rescue man from tyranny and enable him to be free. And I have borne my share of danger in every attempt I have made for this purpose." Thomas Paine's purpose is clear throughout all of these letters that we are seeing in parts 1 through 4. The pursuit of freedom. And as he said, not just saying all men are created equal and actually meaning all certain kinds of men, right? He meant no, all men, no matter what they look like and who they are and where they were born and what they speak and what they believe. So, Thomas Paine, an advocate, a politician, a warrior for justice, possibly one of our first civil rights activists in America, dare we say? Why not give someone credit who fought against the ultimate evil in this nation that we still are reaping the pains behind? Why not give credence to Thomas Paine, someone who wrote interesting letters to Thomas Jefferson that we can now reflect on and see they were the beginnings of a freer America?
Hello, this is Congresswoman Shontel Brown representing Ohio's 11th Congressional District. I want to thank the Thomas Paine Memorial Association for highlighting Paine's anti-slavery efforts. Right now, in states across the country, there is an effort to whitewash our history, to ban books, bastardize the past, and belittle Black history. Thomas Paine's slave letter is so important because it explodes the notion slavery isn't a key part of our history. It explodes the idea that our founding fathers were perfect heroes. He called out the hypocrisy of all those cried for freedom in 1776, but then ignored those goals for Black people. Paine shows that calling out the impact of slavery isn't revisionist history, it's real history. Mr. Paine was no friend to the British Empire or the monarchy, but he recognized that their crimes were trivial compared to slavery. In the slave letter, he wrote, "The monarchies and aristocracies, which have been so often decreed by politicians as oppressive and violent, are states of independence in comparison of that state of bondage in which the American Black man is kept." Paine shows that even in 1809, there were honest voices calling out the notion that slavery benefited enslaved people. Paine writes clearly that it was inhumane, irreligious, and a heinous crime. He referred to painful truths which no person can deny. But of course, many of those things are now denied today, even by governors, members of Congress, and people running for office. So thank you for calling attention to his writing. As Paine understood, it is on all of us to tell the truth and fight for liberty and justice. Thank you.
Peace and love, everyone. This is Congressman Jamaal Bowman. I want to start by thanking the Thomas Paine Memorial Association and Margaret Downey for shining a light on this important piece of our history and inviting me to speak. Thomas Paine's letter to Jefferson shows that even at the time of our country's founding, there were people speaking out against the enslavement and horrible mistreatment of Black people in America. In his letter, Paine doesn't soften his message at all. He directly recognizes slavery for the heinous crime that it was, referring to it as brutal, inhumane, and unjust. Paine also says that communities cannot survive if a subset of their members are being subjugated and oppressed. He acknowledges our inherent interdependence and the contributions of enslaved people, and says that the nation runs on the stolen labor of enslaved people. He directly points out the contradiction between our American values of liberty and justice for all and the injustice that enslaved people were facing every day, including at the hands of many of our founders. This contradiction continues to this day through the injustices Black Americans face in all aspects of our lives. We are not living up to our nation's values until we close the racial wealth gap, end mass incarceration, and make sure that all people are given the resources and opportunities they need to thrive. Paine also calls Jefferson to release the people he enslaved and pay them reparations all the way back in 1809. Reparations are not a new idea, nor are they unrealistic. We are still fighting for reparations to Black Americans today, and I'm a proud co-sponsor of HRES 414, Rep. Cori Bush's resolution calling for reparations and official federal acknowledgement of the harms of slavery. We must continue the legacy of anti-racist allies like Thomas Paine and fight for true economic, social, and political equality for Black people and all marginalized people. Thank you all so much again for uplifting this important piece of history. Peace and love to you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dom, Congresswoman Brown, and Congressman Bowman. Thus far, we have heard from historians, professors, a doctor who is also an activist, congressional representatives, and a feminist activist / politician. We're now going to lighten the mood a bit and host someone Margaret has previously worked with on several programs. Margaret is pleased to introduce comedian, actor, producer, Army veteran, and podcaster Ty Barnett.
Ty Barnett was a special guest during the 2021 May Day for Humanity online secular event that raised $25,000 for homeless shelters and food banks. Ty has been generous with his time, and tonight he brings us a comedic viewpoint mixed with his incredible passion for social justice.
So when I was first asked to do this, Margaret sent an email, and it just read, event to honor abolitionist T. Paine. And I was honored and humbled. And then I thought, wait, when the hell was T. Paine an abolitionist? How old is this dude? Is he like a vampire or something? Did he do this in between albums? And then I realized she meant this T. Paine, Thomas Paine. And I had to do my research because I had never heard of him, which was embarrassing because as a Black man who has studied history, I thought I knew all the white folk who had ever helped us historically. From John Brown to William Lloyd Garrison, and my personal favorite, Mr. Rogers. Hey, that was a very controversial episode in his neighborhood. See what I did there? Because the theme song actually says in the name. It's fine. You know what? Focus time. Focus. So then I thought maybe I'll do something funny, humorous. Maybe show the ramifications of freedom fighters like Paine never existing or ever standing up for the rights of Black people. And could you imagine in 2024, Black people still not being allowed to read? Okay, that's gonna be a double. No! You know, this really could be avoided if you let me pick up a book. But the more I discovered about Mr. Paine, the more I thought, instead of making light of such a dark time in American history, I wanted to highlight how much respect I gained for a dude I literally just learned about. What he stood for, believed in, accomplished, and more importantly, who he accomplished it for should be celebrated. What he spoke out against should be remembered. And him choosing humanity over hatred should be revered. Now I say choosing humanity because honestly, during that time, he could have just accepted how things were. He didn't have to do what was right, just, decent, and civil. Yet he chose to. And that's how real change is made. His use of the term men stealers when describing the practice of slavery, while the country and a lot of parts of the world called it business, accentuated his understanding of what African human beings had to endure. Basically, he was woke before it was cool. Because historically, we as Black people have been made to feel like our struggle is just that. Our struggle, our pain, and our injustice. Historically, we've been made to feel that if you don't look like us, you can't possibly understand us. Our ancestors were made to feel that why would or should anybody who doesn't look like us even give a damn about us? Thomas Paine was one of the rare exceptions to the literal rule. He could have gone along with the status quo. Because remember, it was normal to look at an African as less than. Literally, 3/5 of a person, it was written. So for him to not just look at us, but see us, was not only revolutionary, it was right and just and civil and decent. Him truly recognizing and acknowledging Black people as fathers, mothers, daughters, and sons. When the law of the land then actually allowed for otherwise is why we're talking about him today. Unfortunately, his philosophy on mankind during an ancient time, a time of enlightenment, is still needed today. But if it wasn't for people like Paine and others who shared his ideology, we wouldn't be where we are today. And more importantly, if that ideology hadn't been acted on, past atrocities would still be commonplace. A couple of Thomas Paine quotes stood out to me. One, man has no property in man, nor has any generation a property in the generations which to follow. And man did not enter into society to become worse than before, nor have less rights than before, but to have those rights better secured. His natural rights are the foundation of human rights, meaning you can't own a person or their kids, which in 2024 makes common sense. It's just regular, it's natural. But we often forget that there was a time in history where that was not the case. So progress was needed and made. And don't get me wrong, progress is still needed, but it was made. Because to go from something so barbaric as to take a parent from their child, their children, their family, simply because of what they look like, to the descendants of those slaves, sending their kids to college, takes compassion, understanding, and progress. It's the difference between Black women being viewed as cooks, cleaners, and worse, to scientists, doctors, and first ladies. It's the difference between laws that prohibited voting and the advancement of Black men and women to a generation of modern day Black lawmakers and presidents. Lastly, Thomas Paine also said, the greatest forces that can be brought into the fields of revolution are reason and common interest. Now, I took that to mean that regardless of your background, your culture, etc., we're human beings and should be treated as such. And the reason and the common interest are what affects 97% of us. Job security, poverty, healthcare, bodily autonomy, keeping yourself and your family safe. So if we start with those reasons and those common interests, we can truly start to build a society that nurtures, considers, values, and cares for everyone who needs it. Thank you for your time. Now I gotta go listen to the other T-Pain.
Thank you so much, Ty. As a special treat, we will now hear from Ian Raskin, who was the voice of Thomas Paine throughout the 4-part presentation of the slave letter. Welcome, Ian.
Thank you. It's been really interesting to sit here and listen to all those thoughts about the letter. So such a rich thing for me to take that all in. I think I just want to say two things about I discovered the letter through Gary Burton. Thank you very much, Gary. And when I read it, the two things that really stood out to me were, he wrote this letter when he was nearing his death. He was in bad health. He wrote it from a bed, dictating it. He by then had lost so many friends because of what he'd written about slavery, about religion, about all kinds of subjects. So many people had turned their backs on him. Jefferson is one of the few people who still gave him some time of the day. And Paine nevertheless decided to write this letter to one of the few men who still could speak to him. And that to me was, I found that very moving. And it was a letter that had a lot of anger in it. And that moment in the part 3 where he says, "We will come and slit your throats." That's serious language. So I really felt that. I've always had this sense with Paine that if he felt he had to say something, he would say it. Never mind the consequences. And God knows he paid for that various times in his life. The other thing just is that the very end of the letter suddenly becomes poetic. This idea of coming together and having these big picnics and singing like the birds. And when I was writing the play, my play, one of the notes I got from one of the scholars was, consider the idea that Paine was an optimist. And I really think he was. I think for all that he went through and for all the evil he could see, I think he always was an optimist. And I think that ending of the letter is, in a way, him saying to Jefferson, but also saying just out loud for his own hope that it could be different. It could be better, and maybe it will be. And I found that a very wonderful way to end the letter.
Thank you, Ian, for bringing Thomas Paine's words to life. Your voice portrayal of Paine was amazing. Many people don't know that Paine was also a talented poet, and we are so very pleased that secular poet Victor Harris has agreed to read one of his favorite poems by Thomas Paine. The poem Liberty Tree was written in 1775. In the colonial era, a stately elm tree in the middle of town would serve as a place to meet, socialize, share ideas, and conduct public demonstrations. In addition to being a poet, Victor is also an independent business owner and social activist who lives in California. Welcome, Victor Harris.
Liberty Tree. In a chariot of light from the regions of day, the goddess of liberty came. 10,000 celestials directed her way, and hither conducted the dame. A fair budding branch from the gardens above, where millions with millions agree, she brought in her hand as a pledge of her love, and the plant she named Liberty Tree. The celestial exotic stuck deep in the ground, like a native it flourished and bore the fame of its fruit to the nations around, to seek out this peaceable shore. Unmindful of names or distinctions they came, for freemen like brothers agree. With one spirit endured, they one friendship pursued, and their temple was Liberty Tree. Beneath this fair tree, like the patriarchs of old, their bread and contentment they ate, unvexed with the troubles of silver or gold, the cares of the grand and the great. With timber and tar they old England supplied, and supported her power on the sea. Her battles they fought, without getting a groat, for the honor of Liberty Tree. But here, O ye swines, 'tis a tale most profane, how all the tyrannical powers, kings, commons, and lords, are uniting again to cut down this guardian of ours. From the east to the west blow the trumpets to arms. Through the land let the sound of it flee. Let the far and the near all unite with a cheer in defense of our Liberty Tree.
Thank you, Victor. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break before we start the question and answer segment of the event. During the break, we'll host another beautiful musical presentation from Cynthia McDonald. She is singing Liberty Tree, a song based on the Thomas Paine poem you just heard recited by Victor Harris. Cynthia has updated the message in her version of the poem, and her artistic presentation demonstrates that a liberty tree can take many forms and its importance is relevant to modern times. During the song presentation, if you need to leave your room, please turn the volume of your device up high so you can hear Cynthia's beautiful voice from afar. If you miss her performance during the break, don't worry. It will be on the recording of this event, which will be posted on YouTube.
another beautiful presentation from our friend Cynthia McDonald. Seems to me that we need a lot more liberty trees planted around the United States, symbolizing that democracy is a gift we must preserve and cherish. Cynthia is a member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation's Godless Gospel, and she is also a social activist, working with various organizations in Chicago and nationally. She seeks to achieve equality, economic justice for Black descendants of chattel slavery.
Some of the speakers you saw during the program are with us for this question and answer segment. You can look at the Zoom boxes to learn who is still online. If you would like to ask a question, please use the raise hand function in the Zoom participation option, or you may place your question in the chat. So we'll now start our Q&A.
Great. Please raise your hand if you have a question and would like to be seen and heard live. Or if you prefer, you can just type your question in the chat. Please keep your questions short to allow for us to accommodate everyone during this segment. And I'll now be reading a question that has appeared in the chat. This one is from Steve Mendelson. Is there any evidence of Jefferson's reaction to Paine's letter?
I'm going to ask Gary Burton if he is still online. He is our expert in this. Could you unmute Gary, please?
Yes, Gary's unmuted now.
Okay. You hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry. Repeat the question, please. I was trying to unmute while you were talking.
No worries. The question was, is there evidence of Jefferson's reaction to Paine's letter?
The reaction was, as far as we know, Jefferson never spoke about Paine after that letter. He never acknowledged his death, and he just politely ignored him and never attacked him, but never recognized him as any contributor to the American Revolution and his election. So that was it. He met with Lafayette and someone called Frances Wright, who was the first feminist in America. And Lafayette and Frances Wright went to visit Jefferson. And Frances Wright was known as the female Thomas Paine. And when they met, as far as we can tell, Paine was not a subject of discussion. And Lafayette was very close to Paine. Paine schooled him in 1789 in Paris about the coming revolutions and how we should form governments. So, you know, Paine was literally written out of history by the professional professors and by ex-friends, and but it wasn't on religion. I have to keep correcting that. It was on politics.
Great. Thank you for the question, Steve. Next, I see a hand raise from Rhett Kuseski. Is that correct?
Thank you, everybody. What a great, wonderful presentation. Kind of similar to that last question, I was really curious about, I mean, you kind of somewhat answered it, but what about any other further response to his letters? Did anybody else quote those letters? Did it get all the way to Abraham Lincoln later? Is there any knowledge or history of that?
As far as I know, the letter sat in the Jefferson collection of papers, and it wasn't dug up, I believe, until the 20th century. So it had no real impact. That's why it's important for us to give that letter exposure, because it's an important American document, extremely important. In our 6-volume sets of collected works of Paine, half of which has never been printed before, this is the final piece in the 6 volumes. That was the last thing he wrote, basically.
Great. We have another question from Debbie Jackson. Is there any writings of Paine or by Paine regarding the genocide of indigenous Americans?
You want me to keep going? I can keep talking all night.
Why don't you talk about his wonderful service to get a peace agreement with Native Americans?
Yeah, Paine had a friendly relationship with the 6 tribes. He met with them in Eastern Pennsylvania in 70, I'm going to get this wrong, 79 maybe. And he spoke about that meeting a lot. There is an article in our last newsletter from our association. By the way, I keep trying to put a chat up for everyone, and I can't figure out how to do it. So I'll say it orally. Go to thomaspaine.org, where our website is. If you're interested in Paine and getting into depth, you should join us, become a member, you get our newsletter, and there's all these interesting facts. A recent article in the newsletter was Thomas Paine and the Iroquois nations. And it shows how when he went back to Europe during the French Revolution, he would speak with people about the native tribes in North America with great praise, and they had a basic democratic viewpoint and a basic sense of equality within the nations. And he always admired them, spoke highly of them. Unfortunately, the idea that the European settlers and the indigenous populations, the different tribes, would be able to live side by side together. And it's one of Paine's major failings, that he didn't foresee what was happening. The Europeans inherited the British idea of racism and conquest. And so it didn't end well.
I'd like to add to that narrative, please. The year was 1777.
Okay.
When Thomas Paine was sent by Congress to meet with the Iroquois Six Nation chiefs in Easton. But with him, there were 2 signers of the Declaration of Independence, George Walton of Georgia and George Taylor, who was a resident of Easton, Pennsylvania. The meeting lasted for 4 days. And Thomas Paine was so impressed with the Native Americans, who, by the way, their delegation included men, women, and children. And even though, this might sound unwoke, I'll quote from his original meeting report. And he said that the people he met had natural beauty, prudence, and intelligence.
That's great. Thank you, Margaret. I see another hand raised from Clive Aruede. I might have mispronounced that. Let me know.
I'm sorry, was that for me?
It's for Clive Aruede had a question.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Your pronunciation of my name was just right. I'm from London, England, and I've just to. I hope you can hear me. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm from London, England, and just before I ask my question, I just say thanks to all of you. It's been a tremendous event. I'm from a group called the Association of Black Humanists. Professor Chris Cameron has given us a talk before, as has Anthony Pinn and Mandisa Thomas. So I feel as if I'm amongst friends. Now, I've recently got to know a bit about Thomas Paine, so I'm just in awe of the man. He's just amazing, and he did all his efforts to bring freedom to United States, and then what he did in Europe, in Paris, in France, is incredible. But I understand he also did something in South America, or he had an influence in South America. Can anybody tell me something about his influence in South America, please?
Definitely. First, I want to ask Clive, what time is it over where you are in England? It must be pretty late, right?
Yes, it's
2 o'clock.
2:15 in the morning.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for joining us at 2 a.m. We're so excited you could make it and weren't too tired.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Does anyone think they can tackle that question?
Repeat the question real quick. You can tell me what he asked.
Clive, could you repeat that?
Yeah, so I understand that he had some influence in the independence of South American countries.
Okay, I remember.
Yeah, could you tell me something about that?
Sure. Well, Philadelphia in, I believe around 1790, a little bit after that, printed Rights of Man in Spanish. And it was shipped, many copies in crates down to Simon Bolivar and other places. And it's reported that Simon Bolivar, who inspired a lot of revolutions against the Europeans in South America, had a copy of Common Sense in Spanish in his back pocket throughout all the fighting and all the wars against the colonialists. There were several land formations in South America named after Paine. So he has never been forgotten. It's tough because our association tries to establish links to them, and it's very difficult because we're illiterate and we don't speak Spanish very well. And there are a lot of people doing research on Paine and influence in South America, although he never set foot there. But his impact was enormous when you think of what happened in the South American revolutions in the 1820s.
The Rights of Man is also very influential to the people in Ireland.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, and in fact, Thomas Paine used to socialize with Irish people when he was in France, and they were inspired by the Rights of Man. And actually, Napoleon admitted to Madame Bonneville that he slept with the Rights of Man under his pillow.
Well, he was probably boasting, but yeah. Paine was made a United Irishman. United Irishman was a group that was organizing to throw Britain out of Ireland. And Paine was made an honorary member. He had a great impact in the Irish revolutions.
Oh, interesting. I have seen a hand from Don Jones.
Hi, everyone. How are you? So good to be here at this very lovely event. Let me see. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to add to the influence of Thomas Paine. In addition to Ireland, he was also very much influential in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands, he really helped contribute to the political and the intellectual climate that really inspired a lot of those political changes in the region. And in addition, it kind of moved all over Europe because he also impacted Poland. His ideas reached Poland as well during a time of a lot of upheaval, his emphasis on those democratic principles. So you can see how, as I mentioned earlier in the videos, Thomas Paine really contributed a lot to the intellectual growth and thought that established the democracies and the governments that would uplift people in equality and in equity. And I think that was really a really wonderful thing that he did.
What we need to do is arrange for an airdrop of the Rights of Man in Russia.
I saw another hand raised that I think dropped off. I think it might have been Chevy, is that correct? Or well, I see Drew Blake now,
Drew,
so
yeah.
Drew, I will
unmute.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, you're still muted. I just asked you to unmute.
Now I'm muted or
Okay.
unmuted. Thank you. I've been a non-believer most of my life, and I'm a recently joined the Humanists of the Treasure Coast, and I've been with Freedom from Religion Foundation for quite a while on an excursion to Martinique. I had the good fortune to go to a museum that was all about Victor Schurschel. Does anybody else know who he is, Schurschel?
Could you spell that?
I'm sorry.
Can you spell that?
I'm murdering the French pronunciation, but it's Schoelcher. Schurschel.
No, doesn't ring a bell.
In any event, so I'm attending this. We're in Martinique, and a year ago I didn't even know what a humanist was. I do now. And they said he was a humanist, an abolitionist, and not only an abolitionist in terms of the obvious slavery that we all know, but subtle forms of slavery that still exist today. And I was just fascinated by him. He was very rich. He inherited his father's, Mark Schulcher, his porcelain business in Martinique. And so he had the means and the motivation to bring slavery to an end. And as we know, I believe the French were before us in abolishing it, pretty sure. And many countries had abolished slavery well before we did. Unfortunately, it was just too profitable in this country. But in any event, I was just curious that he was also very pro education, non-religious education, secular education. He was very pro women's rights and children's rights. And he was appalled by how children were being used in industries because, small hands, they could fit into the machinery kind of thing. And anyway, it was fascinating, but I would strongly recommend anybody that ever visits Martinique to avail themselves of that museum. It was an amazing place. And I learned a lot about humanists, where humanism came from, and some famous people that advocated it.
Great, thank you so much, Drew.
Oh, sorry, it wasn't really a question.
Yeah, but it was
more an observation.
Gotcha. Next, I'm going to take a question that came in from the comments. This one is from Jesse Lambert. They asked, how do you think Thomas Paine would feel about the modern slavery of prisoners being used, especially with private prisons like the largest plantation in Louisiana?
Well, I'm ashamed to say I was born in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And when I did research on my family, I did learn that several family members were Confederates. So I do not know about this particular plantation. Does anyone else in attendance have any information about that or thoughts about that? I certainly will look it up now.
Well, I can add a quote from Paine right there. He says, if you want to brag about your Constitution, one of the items that he lists was your jails are empty. And if your jails aren't empty, you can't brag about your Constitution. So he was way ahead of us on all that.
I think the question writer has their hand raised, so I'm going to ask them to unmute if they can.
Yeah, so what's going on is the largest plantation that the United States had is now a private prison. And they're using the prisoners basically as modern day slaves, picking cotton for no wages. Yeah, it's in the news. Yeah, and making materials inside, and it is just an outrageous form, of modern day slavery. And for it to be on a plantation turned into a modern day prison is just the most gut-wrenching feeling. So that is just, that's it. Sorry.
Dom, you have your hand raised too.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that. That was with the comment that was made. We really can see through the writings that, Paine, and Jesse, to your point, Paine was a strong advocate, really was, of any kind of institutionalized injustice whatsoever. So right now with the prison industrial complex and so many things happening with the prison system, as was mentioned, using prisoners themselves to do slave labor. I'm actually aware of this in the South. It is something that he would definitely, as was mentioned earlier, redo a few words, but would really maintain the same theory and thesis that this is the great stain of American soil. I will add that in many ways, maybe Thomas Paine would agree that our addressing of slavery and its inflictions and its pains largely has been, even as many of hundreds of years that it's been largely superficial, because we still are coping today with so many ramifications of slavery, down to, the injustice of a child going to school and being bullied because of the color of their skin, down to someone not wanting to learn how to drive because they are a person with brown or black skin and they're afraid of police officers. So there's so many things that really have created the system that we live in today. I think Thomas Paine in many ways would be very, very happy and joyous of the freedom of slaves, but at the same time, especially what we're seeing today, would know we have a long way to go to achieve our American ideals.
We're going to have to take the last question, but keep your questions in the chat, and we will try to address every question through the chat in a follow-up email. But please, let's have the last question because we wanted to get back to the program at 6:30 Pacific time.
I think Ian Ruskin had your hand raised. I don't know if you still have a question, but you saw that a little bit earlier.
I just had a comment that which ties in with something that Gary was saying. I did a little European tour of my play, and I performed it at Kilkee Castle in Ireland, which was the home of Edward Fitzgerald. Edward Fitzgerald went to Paris in 1791, I think, as a lord, stayed with Paine, and left Paris as a man who had resolved to renounce all titles. He joined the United Irishmen and was killed, shot, and eventually died from his wounds in a confrontation with them. But Paine certainly, not alone, but was one of the men who radicalized this man, and I was then performing in his home, his castle, which was quite an extraordinary thing to do. But yeah, but Paine definitely had and in the Irish audience, I did 2 performances there, they were very, very passionate about the importance of Paine and the impact he had on all their struggles for freedom, over decades, centuries. It was really quite strong. They loved Paine. Yeah.
Thank you, Ian.
This concludes the question and answer portion of the program. Sponsors of this event will now express their thanks to you for attending with a self-introduction and a brief overview of the organization they represent. This program was made possible with their financial assistance.
The Thomas Paine Memorial Association is one of 6 sponsors of tonight's event. If you would like to donate to the Thomas Paine Monument Project, or perhaps help us in the future with program needs, please visit the Thomas Paine Memorial Association website at thomaspainememorial.org. The Thomas Paine Memorial Association is a 501c3 nonprofit educational organization. All donations are tax deductible where permitted by law. So if you enjoyed this event and would like to help, please consider donating tonight. A donation link will also appear in the chat. We now present messages from other sponsors.
Hi, I'm Robin Blumner, President and CEO of the Center for Inquiry. The Center for Inquiry is an organization founded in the 1970s by people like Carl Sagan, Isaac Asimov, James the Amazing Randi, and Paul Kurtz, with a mission to stand up for reason, science, and secularism. And who better to embody those values than Thomas Paine, the author of one of the greatest books of the Enlightenment, The Age of Reason. As we've seen today, Thomas Paine was a man well ahead of his time, a true freethinker, and somebody whose principles did not extend only to people who looked like himself. I think if Thomas Paine were catapulted to America today, he would just be simply astounded by our racial progress. Not only did America fight a civil war to end the heinous crime of slavery, but ultimately it gave all people the right to vote and the right to be treated equally under the law. I think this would have fulfilled Thomas Paine's great hope for our nation. He would have undoubtedly been astounded to learn that America had had a Black president, that today we have a Black female vice president, and that 2 members of the US Supreme Court also are Black. He would have been immensely impressed by our Black Secretary of Defense and all of these cabinet posts currently held by Black leaders, including the Office of Management and Budget, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the post of US Ambassador to the United Nations. This is what happens when the ideals of the Enlightenment are allowed to blossom, and the gifts of liberty are given their full expression to all people, to all Americans, regardless of race. The Center for Inquiry is proud to be a sponsor of today's important event, and we will continue to stand up for those Enlightenment values wherever and whenever they are challenged. Thank you.
Greetings. My name is Patrick Ennis. As a longtime board member of the Free Thought Society, I'm here to convey how proud we are to be co-sponsoring this event honoring the anti-slavery work of Thomas Paine. The Free Thought Society is a nonprofit educational organization and has a long history of celebrating the life and work of Thomas Paine. Since 1994, the Free Thought Society has conducted Thomas Paine-themed school assemblies and has created Thomas Paine Day proclamations, culminating in public events and even a parade. Back in the 1980s, hip-hop artist Afrika Bambaataa name-dropped Thomas Paine in his song, The Renegades of Funk. This song reminded us that Paine's work has inspired Americans and people around the world for a quarter millennium, and a line can be drawn from Paine right through to progressive thinkers of today. Thomas Paine's slave letter is just one more piece of evidence that a monument dedicated to him is long overdue. We look forward to co-sponsoring more events such as this one, and we are committed to advocating for a Thomas Paine monument in Washington, D.C. The Free Thought Society's web address will appear in the credits and in the chat. We hope you will join in our efforts to maintain separation of religion and government. Like Thomas Paine, the Free Thought Society seeks equality, justice, democracy, and peace within our time. Thank you for attending, and thank you for your interest in learning more about Thomas Paine's incredible foresight, high morals, and commitment to ethical living. Good night.
Hi, my name is Deanna Williams, and I'm a board member with Black Nonbelievers, which is a 501c3 organization that provides secular fellowship for Black people and allies, supports non-believers in coming out, encourages pride in non-religious identities, and engages in secular activism for minority communities. We are proud to sponsor the Thomas Paine event. With Black History Month right around the corner, it is important to highlight the anti-slavery work of many people, including Thomas Paine. His pamphlets and his letters influenced thousands. He was an abolitionist, a secularist, and a revolutionary. So we honor him for how he has helped our country, and we stand with the Free Thought Society for all that they are doing to keep his memory and his works alive. Like Thomas Paine, BN fights for a secular society that is racially equal and that works to fight to take care of its citizens. If you would like to learn more about what we do, you can visit us on our website at blacknonbelievers.org. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for celebrating an important figure in our history. Happy birthday, Thomas Paine.
Thanks for being part of the 2024 Paine Day event. I'm Annie Laurie Gaylor.
And I'm Dan Barker. We're co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which co-sponsored this event and is proud to be a member organization of the Thomas Paine Memorial Association. FFRF is a 501c3 educational organization in our 46th year with more than 40,000 members around the United States and Canada. FFRF is both a state church watchdog and an association for freethinkers. That's atheists, agnostics, rationalists, and humanists. Please learn more about the Freedom from Religion Foundation at our website, ffrf.org, where you can request a complimentary copy of our newspaper, Free Thought Today, and a brochure about our many legal and educational achievements to move our society forward.
And Thomas Paine was a freethinker. FFRF is delighted to have co-sponsored this fascinating program to credit Paine's overlooked contributions to the early abolitionist movement. We're also committed to finally ensuring there's a monument to Paine erected in Washington, D.C. on federal land, where we can gather, protest, and further his goals to ensure reason, equality, secularism, and democracy prevail. We have the congressional go-ahead. Now our biggest need is your financial support. Every donation, small or large, gets us a step closer to erecting what will be an amazing and inspiring monument. Thank you for joining us today to celebrate Thomas Paine's birthday and legacy by making a contribution to the Paine Monument campaign.
Even though you'll be seeing credit slides next, we have some wonderful surprises for you, so please stay connected. After the credit slides, Cynthia McDonald will sing her cover of the song Tom Paine's Bones, written by Graham Moore in the year 2000. Many of you in the audience already know that Thomas Paine was buried on the grounds of his New Rochelle, New York home in June of 1809. In 1817, William Cobbett, a one-time foe of Thomas Paine, wanted to make amends for having disrespected the man he had come to admire and respect. Cobbett dug up Thomas Paine's bones with the intention of placing them in a place of honor, preferably in England. The bones, however, went missing and to this day remain non-existent. What is still in existence, however, is our collective admiration of what Thomas Paine stood for, and we should all be dancing to the rhythm of Tom Paine's Bones.
The song Cynthia will present after the credit slides marks an end to tonight's formal program, but the beginning of a social hour. After the showing of the credit slideshow, we will open the social hour with special guests, Zenos Frudakis, who is joining us from his studio in Glenside, Pennsylvania. Xenos is the sculptor we have selected to work with as we move forward with the Thomas Paine Washington, D.C. Monument Plan. A link to his studio will be placed in the chat so you can see all the marvelous pieces he has created.
We thank all the co-sponsors and remind audience members that all the supporting organizations provide a philosophical home and do their part in educating the public. If you cannot stay for the social hour, we thank you so much for spending time with us. I'll be one person who will be saying goodnight at this time. I've enjoyed being a co-host of this event, and I want to say thank you to my co-host, Margaret Downey, for taking over at this point. The social hour will be recorded and will be included in the YouTube posting, so anyone leaving now can view later what goes on as sculptor Xenos Ferdakis is featured as a special social hour guest.
Well, Cynthia's version of Graham Moore's song, Tom Paine Bones, was a great way to end the formal session of the event and jump into our social hour. Thank you so much, Cynthia, for the fantastic song and thought-provoking visuals. So, welcome everyone to the January 29th, 2024 social hour. We will kick off this segment with a greeting from Zenos Frudakis, who is ready to show us the Thomas Paine statue and discuss possible plans for the Washington, D.C. monument. Welcome, Zenos. Can you unmute yourself?
I believe I am unmuted. How are you, Margaret?
Doing well. It's so nice to see you.
Nice to see you, and I got something in my throat.
Oh, all choked up and having.
Well, I have a cat here, so it's probably a hairball. It's my studio cat. I have a question for you, Margaret. Did we, in speaking about the letter, you know, when I was looking for reference material, primary reference material, if I could find it, paintings of Thomas Paine, of course, there wouldn't be photos, or drawings of the time. I thought that Thomas Jefferson had a painting, and there's the story of him receiving this letter from Thomas Paine and slashing the painting. Now, is that apocryphal, or is that wasn't mentioned at all? And because when someone was asking Gary, was that the last word? No word at all. It seemed to me that slashing a painting is a further last word.
Well, here's the real story.
Okay.
So, Thomas Jefferson did commission a portrait of his dear friend, Thomas Paine, from a French artist. He had it hung in his beautiful mansion in Virginia. And years and years later, after the mansion was taken over, they found the portrait in a closet with slash marks on it. The rumor started that Thomas Jefferson had actually made the slash marks after receiving the letter, and we can't prove it.
I see.
It's not a story based in any evidence other than hearsay. So that's why we didn't mention it. It's
okay, I wondered. Yeah,
it's
such a good story. Yeah. Well, Margaret, does that painting exist, even slashed somewhere?
Yes, yes.
I wonder if I've seen that painting, but has it been repaired? And that's why I didn't notice the slashing.
You know, I'm not up to speed on.
I'd like to see it.
I'll get you a picture of it.
Okay, good.
But I also, gosh, I don't know where I can find it. I think there's a picture online, but I'm not sure. You know, a picture of.
I've tried to, I don't think I've seen it. I've tried to find any reference that I can. I do that with, you know, I can show you sometimes almost hundreds of photos of people on scoped if there are photographs available. But paintings, of course, they're going to be much less, even if there's someone like well, I don't know, unless they were like George Washington or someone, which, you know, there were many paintings. And then you really depend on how good the artist was, because if somebody painted him, and I don't think he was painted by a first-rate painter. A first-rate person should have a first-rate artist represent them, because if they're not very good, and you know, from then it's not very helpful, you know, if they're not. But anyway,
I'm going to ask people. Well, first of all, why don't you show us the progress you've made?
Well, I was working out while we were the presentation. It's what I have. We started with a small model here, and usually when you're an artist, you start with concept, and it goes from what's in your head and maybe what people have requests of you. If you're commissioned, then you're listening to other people as well. And the idea, when you and I started with this, because this was an idea that you hatched many years ago, and you went through that first round in Washington, and then when you told me about it, we gave it a second try. And I think once having an idea, we didn't know where it was going to go, so I had to think of a way of presenting him in case I mean, if it was going to go in the Capitol, it would have to be about 7 feet on a 3-foot pedestal. That was sort of the accepted measurements for that kind of project. And if it was going to go outside, then it would be okay to have something that would also work outside. But if you did something that would go outside, it may not work inside. So I was trying to do something that was broad enough, which in a way can kind of water down your idea or at least make it less focused. But I think it's okay. And as we worked on it, I added this other part in case it goes outside, with the idea that maybe a little context. He's just jumped up from his desk writing.
Zenos, lean back a little bit so we can see the whole.
Here's the idea, with the chair falling back behind him and his desk, and he has the common sense here. There's a inkwell that's spilled here and it's fallen over, and because he's excited about what the idea of independence and freedom and common sense and reason and all the rest.
The air is going into his coat as if he's walking briskly.
Yeah, progressive. So he's a dreamer. He's a visionary. He's got his pen in his hand, the feather pen, which is feather, I guess, is part of flight, isn't it? Taking flight and fancy. And,
well, I don't think he had a choice in penmanship. All he had was a quill.
Yeah. And so the 7-foot Thomas Paine is back there, next to his intellectual father here, his Enlightenment father, Benjamin Franklin, whose letter probably saved his life, the one that he had in his pocket when he got to America and he was sick from England, and he got good. He got the doctor to take care of him because he had friends in high places. So this is the Thomas Paine. This is made with an old plastiline that was used to make the Lincoln Memorial, a lot of other sculptures, and so that has a nice feeling of history for me. But anyway, so the Ben Franklin is something else. It's another project that Margaret and I are working on, and but to me the Enlightenment idea of is so important. That's why part of the Enlightenment idea is that we wouldn't have kings, and that Thomas Paine was saying it's just common sense. Why are we, unless as the kings said, we have a deity to put me in this position. If you don't accept that premise, then you don't accept the king. So we have a democracy. So hopefully
great news for the audience. On March the 1st, we will be starting the site selection process in Washington, D.C. And Zenos will be accompanying our board members, and we're going to be looking at some possible sites.
Yes, and we're hoping to, things can take so long in Washington, D.C., and since we our life is limited, and we want to see this happen in our lifetime. And we have 2026, we have the 250th anniversary coming up of the Declaration and so on. We want to see this happen in our lifetime, so we want to facilitate it and find a site, hopefully one that the Park Service maybe will get excited about. We already have the Park Service's blessing in a sense with the head of it. So I've seen sites. Margaret and I have seen sites that were presented to us, and some we like better than others, but some of those that we like the most, probably the hardest to get. So it'll take longer. So there might be a little bit of a compromise there, but they're all pretty good sites.
But our goal is to make it as easy as possible to get approval for the site, because we're shooting for 2026 to unveil at the 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So we're striving for that. And hopefully we will have that happen. And everyone who attended all of our Zoom events will be notified and will be able to attend if they can. But we're working very hard to reach that goal.
Yes. And it's as I've said before, that you want to want people to realize this isn't an afterthought. You found a good location, that you think he's important and the site is important, but we do have to balance that with how difficult politically would be to secure that site. So, and if it has a proximity to the Capitol, then it'll make it easier for people to go there who are, well, someone like Jamie Raskin who's expressed interest in doing that and speaking about common sense in Washington while having behind him or next to him a Thomas Paine.
Yes.
So.
Yes. Well, let's take questions from our audience members. And Hyder, would you help me unmute people?
Margaret, is only you and I here, or are there other people in the...
Our audience, yeah, there's quite an audience still.
Oh, good, good.
So Monty Vin raised his hand.
I've darkened the rest of the studio so it doesn't distract you. I have a 10-foot Muhammad Ali right behind Thomas Paine that I'm working.
Monty should be unmuted.
Way to
Yeah,
go.
can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, Margaret, back in 2022, I met you. We were about to dance until interference happened. You're going to teach me how to dance. I don't know if you remember.
Was that at the CFI party?
Yes, it was.
Oh, was it a couple of years ago?
Yes, not the last one, but the one before.
Okay, so that was the some kind of costuming that required hula
Yes,
plays.
that's it. You got it.
Oh, the
And so
tropical.
we were all given the book by DeGrasse Tyson.
Oh, yes, yes. He was a special.
Sorry, yes.
He was a speaker for that event. CFI puts on spectacular events. Freedom from Religion Foundation puts on the most wonderful events. So, and I love meeting new people at these events and knowing that I've made a good friend that pops in once in a while with our Zooms. So nice to see you. Do you have a question for Zenos?
I have a question. I don't know if this would be for Zenos, but I wanted to thank all of you who put on this presentation today. It was beautiful. It was great. Each year gets better. And I noticed the theme this year was slavery. What were the themes in the past? Because I went to one other, I think I skipped last year, but the year before I went and contributed. And I thought, in fact, I gave $76 because it was about 1776 and Thomas Paine and all his writings that was the cause for freedom. And I missed last year, but this year was slavery, and I noticed each year it gets better. So it has a theme. What was the theme last year?
Well, let me tell you that when we founded the Thomas Paine Memorial Association, it was founded in 2021. And our first event was a review of Thomas Paine's entire life delivered by different voices. And it was arranged from his birth to his activism, to coming to America, to, and I was Madame Bonneville, which was perfect for me because I portray her. But you'll find that and others on the Free Thought Society YouTube channel. Then the next year, we had a proclamation celebration. And that was to present all the proclamations that we had accumulated over the years in being presented by different board members. So John Delancey and his beautiful wife presented one, and Ann Druan and Julia Sweeney and Daniel Brunn, and just so many. Ian presented one. So that one is a really fun one to look at.
That's the one I was president, that one.
Okay. Okay.
And what about last year?
Oh, what about last year? I can't read.
2023.
I thought that was the proclamation celebration.
Maybe it was.
Yeah, that's what it was. And then 22 was the life review.
And you mentioned 2021 was the first year.
Yes, but we didn't get it off the ground till 2022. So we started in 2021, December of 2021.
Okay, I'm up to speed. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
We have Jesse.
Great. So let me see if I can find her here in this list.
There's
Jessie. Thank you so much for your recent donation.
You're welcome.
So nice.
It's my pleasure. Absolutely. Absolutely. Obviously, it is convention and conference new year. So Zenos, Margaret, you guys got any plans to hit up any of these conventions and conferences coming up? I've missed you guys a lot. Didn't get to catch you guys last year. So what's going on?
Zenos, do you remember meeting Jesse?
FFRF Boston 2020. Yeah.
You don't meet her and not remember her. She's memorable.
So
her radiant intelligence.
Well, I am planning to be at the Freedom from Religion Foundation's conference in Denver. It's going to be early this year, September.
No.
And yes, it's going to be great fun. I wouldn't, I would love for Zenos to be there, but he's so busy. You know, you never know if he can get away.
I usually go. I didn't make the last one, but because of all the work and the conflict, but I'd love to be there and see everyone.
Are you going to Denver, Jesse, in September?
I will be going to, American Atheists in Philadelphia this year. So if you're around, I'll be at American Atheists.
Actually, I'm working a table, and if you stop by, I can give you a self-guided walking tour that's Thomas Paine themed, and you can start at one point, follow the exact write-up, and go to one point to another, to another, to another, and you'll see a portrait of Thomas Paine in the gallery. And
thank you.
You'll love it.
Yeah,
Are you bringing it here, Margaret? Am I part of that tour?
No, this will be a self-guiding. Yeah.
When is it? When is this thing in Philadelphia? Since I'm in Philadelphia and I'm an atheist, it'd be nice to know.
American Atheists is the end of March, last weekend of March.
Actually, it's Easter weekend.
Yeah, Easter weekend. Yeah. So make sure, there's still availability. So get signed up. So, and then there's SRF, Americans United, in the middle of April, going to that in DC. And then of course, FFRF in September, be going to that. Baja Con and Canada, going to that. So hitting up all the conferences. So yeah, I hope you guys get out to them, and hope to see you guys around. Miss you a lot.
Thank you.
Sounds interesting. That's quite a social, socialize.
So do we see any other raised hands, Hyder?
Yeah, we have a Judah. He was not able to raise his hand, but he has a comment or question.
So, hi, everybody. So first, I live in Denver, so if I can be useful, get a hold of me. Second, Zenos, I want to acknowledge you and honor you for doing your homework on Thomas Paine's face. I really appreciate the efforts you've been making. I saw the bas relief that you did, for example, on your website.
About
And your request this evening.
I still. I'm
But your request this evening for a sample of the one that was done in France that Jefferson commissioned, that shows a diligence that I really am admiring a lot. I'm thanking you for it.
Oh, thank you. I also have a costume of his that I actually I hired someone who's an expert to make for me, and it's behind the sculpture, and it's just so I'd have something. It's important not just to make a reliable portrait of an authentic portrait, in the sculpture, but you have to have authentic clothes. You don't want to have an authentic portrait and then have kind of a costume that somebody would wear maybe at a dinner theater or something that you just threw together that they think this was kind of like it was supposed to look. And so I have the authentic costume, just like I have an authentic costume for Ben Franklin. I don't know if you can see the one of Thomas Paine. It's behind Paine. I can pull it over here, but I've had models pose in it, and still working on that. I was working on it tonight, actually, a little bit while this was all going on.
Judah is quite important in the Thomas Paine movement. He's an editor and writer, and it's an honor to have you here.
I would not miss this. And by the way, if anybody wants to reach me, you can go through either judahfreed.com or you can go to globalsense.com. You can reach me.
Very nice. Thank you for attending.
Certainly, this has been very worthwhile. I'm grateful.
Thank you. And we have Monty.
Just a quick question. Could you, Zenos, could you list your website so I can take a peek?
It's zenosfridakis.com. And if you just put my name in, a lot of stuff will come up. There's the website, there's there's just a long history of videos and things. But
I thought that the link to his studios was put in the chat.
I just put it down again. It should be at the very bottom again, so you can just grab that one.
Thank you, Hyder.
Mhm.
And I saw our friend from Denmark. I hope she's still with us. Maybe she had
Is
to
it
go.
Louise?
Yes, Louise.
She's smiling because she's waiting for you to call on her. You can unmute Louise. You should be able to speak.
We love her.
Hi guys. Hi. Yeah, I'm still here. It's just 4:09 in the morning. So I'm hanging on. But it was a beautiful event, and I'm so glad to have joined you guys. And always interesting to see the progression of the art that you're doing, Senos. It's beautiful as always. And I was very enlightened regarding the letter.
So that works out.
Yeah. I was very enlightened regarding the letter because I was trying to figure out if Thomas Paine had any influence in the movement of abolishing slavery in Denmark and the Nordics, and I couldn't quite figure it out because I know our king back then tried to abolish it in 1792, but it didn't quite take. It wasn't until 1803 it was actually official. The trading of people but then it actually took another almost 50 years, 45 years before it was actually abolished. But he tried. So but it took a while before it took. Yeah. But I don't know if Thomas Paine had any influence in that. I couldn't find anything in academia texts at all regarding it. So,
But what about the rights of man? Was that influential?
I found some links to it throughout history in the Nordics, but there were several different local I would say influences on the same path, because the thought processes throughout Europe, from especially the French, were really felt in all parts of Europe at that point. And the peasants in the Danish areas and the Norwegian and Swedish areas were also, well, they were not quite content, let's just put it that way. So yeah, but it was very interesting to learn more about it. So thank you very much, and a beautiful event as always, Margaret. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I always think of you when I'm designing these events, thinking, how could I keep her interested to stay up that long?
Always. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Mendelsohn. There you are.
Thank you, Margaret. Thanks for this program. This is my first of your programs, and it won't be my last. Question about the statue. In this political climate, I could see putting the statue of a free thinker in Washington, D.C. might be somewhat controversial. Is it approved? Is it a done deal? And it's just a matter of placing a site? Has this flown under the radar? What's the story?
Well, thanks to Jamie Raskin, the bill was introduced in February of 2022, And within that same year, it went through approval in the House and in the Senate, and it was signed into law on December 27th, 2023, by President Biden. It is a bipartisan bill, and we went through several commissioner routines to get approval. They all loved us. It was unanimous. Our presentations included, hey, that's why I had all that information about the Native American situation, because we dug up all of these facts about Thomas Paine to promote the statue and why he deserved one, including his comments about animal rights. You know, one of the first to speak about animal rights. And one of the commissioners said that was the reason she was voting for it. So it's been a wonderful journey, one that is highly supported. You saw that we had 4 Congresspeople on board. And now I plan to use this recording to notify other congressional people about our efforts and why a statue is important. So
Well,
we are on our way for sure.
well, notwithstanding that success, the cynic in me would recommend putting the statue indoors.
If we had that choice, I'd love to see it in the U.S. Capitol, but I think we're going to be happy to have it anywhere in the Capitol, and they're hard to if you're concerned about someone harming it, it's hard to do when they're bronze. I mean, it has happened, but
well, someone just stole Jackie Robinson's bronze.
I saw that, yeah, and I think I'm just looking at the ankles here. I think this will be in a public enough place. I think the Jackie Robinson, there was a time when it wasn't under lights, and I would recommend very strongly having lights at night. And for that,
like that's going to cost a fortune.
Thank you.
It'll be all right. And you know what? We'll have a rubber mold, and if something happens to it, it'll be sure. We can make another one or fix it. The parts of it at the foundry. We had to fix a Robert Ingersoll, and we did that. And that it isn't that hard. It can be done.
Steve, do you know who Robert Ingersoll was?
Oh yeah.
Oh, good. So you'll love this story. We were wanting to refinish it, refurbish it. And with the first quote came in, and it floored us with the expense. And then Zenos jumped in and did this refurbishing absolutely fantastically. His foundry picked up the statue, refurbished it, put it back in place. But tell the story about what the foundry found in the statue.
Oh, you know, the statue had over the years become holy, which was unfortunate because it had holes in it, and it was inappropriate. But also, once this statue got to the foundry, they called me when they said, "You've got to see this. You've got to come over here." And so I rushed over to the foundry, and there were all these little baby praying mantises all over the statue, which again was ironic. So many praying mantises on Robert Ingersoll. So we took it outside so that they could go off into the little wooded area that they have outside the foundry, and maybe do some good work with insect control or something.
Where is that Ingersoll statue?
It's in Peoria, Illinois.
Okay.
In a park, well lit.
You know, and the founder was able to do it for much, much less money than, and I mean, they even, like I said, picked it up, they installed it, and it looks great. It looks good as new, as they say. Yeah.
That was just age-related damage?
Pardon? Well, it was, I think perhaps the original bronze wasn't maybe of the highest quality too. And sometimes people who receive one don't know that, and they don't know how it's made, and there were parts around the ankles where it was rotting out and had to be, or rusting out or something. That was shouldn't be rusting. It's supposed to be a bronze, but anyway. So it was they reinforced it, and they did a great job. And I looked it over and went over a couple areas that needed to be restored a little bit, but it wasn't too bad a shape. But
I did learn something about bronze statues, and that's that every year they need to be cleaned and repolished. And I learned that because Zenos and I were very instrumental in getting this statue of Clarence Darrow installed in Tennessee. We worked very hard with the Freedom from Religion Foundation, and Zenos was spectacular. Ro Prudakis is his business partner, and she got approvals to.
Almost lost it about 7 times, almost went away. And the ironic thing is the person who was very supportive down there was a creationist, but he thought that it should be there because they had that statue, as we did, of William Jennings Bryan there on a court, on the property of this court. And so I patinaed it, speaking about color, I think I patinated it kind of a green. I wanted to match the one of William Jennings Bryan to make it look like it had been there all along. And so anyway, we turned a sculpture that was put there by Religious College to make a religious statement. We turned it all into a historical statement by putting William Jennings Bryan there and creating this drama, because we knew they were going to take it out of there, even though it was a public area. But it was a government area. But anyway, it was, I think it turned out well. I was very happy with that. Margaret and I think the FFRF was very involved in that.
And a local group goes and cleans the statue every year under Zenos's supervision. They use his exact method of cleaning it and polishing it, and they take good care of it.
Yeah, bronze is pretty simple to clean. You just have to wash it with a mild soap without chemicals in it, because you'll affect the color perhaps of the bronze, and then wax it. And so I'm glad there hasn't been any, as far as I know, any kind of shotgun residue or anything. We were threatened with shotgun residue, but one of the self-acclaimed, I think, preachers was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal with a shotgun, and she threatened to surprise us when we brought in the statue. But the police, the local authorities, kept her at bay.
And she also said that she wanted to meet us in the hillside to wage a war. It was nutty.
Yeah. But the danger there was that what she said was kind of nutty, but she may have inspired someone to show up with with a rifle and a scope, and we were considering body armor and.
Well, we did hire bodyguards, actually.
Yeah, armed bodyguards. But it went off very well, and it's there now.
And you can see pictures of it through Zenos's website. You have so many beautiful pieces, Zenos. I hope our viewers will take the time to visit your website and see the fantastic pieces you've created over the years.
Thank you.
You're working on zoo animals right now, aren't you?
I am, for a local zoo, 4 large animals. I've got 3 back there now. They're a life and a half size. One of them is at the Foundry, a buck. There's a jaguar. And as I said, a 10-foot Muhammad Ali and a Bobby Rydell statue. And it's going to be 7 feet. And a couple of businessmen that I can't talk about because it's confidential till they're done. But, and we've also done smaller sculptures that were awards for FFRF of the a kind of forward figure for women rights award, and that went to Gloria Steinem and to Margaret Atwood and others. Those things please me, even though they're not large, because of the people that received them.
Someone in the chat asked, how tall will the Thomas Paine statue be?
Oh yeah, that's what it
that
is.
size right there. It shrinks a tiny bit in bronze, so it's a little over 7 feet high, and so it'll be about 7 feet high.
And there was a cleanup item by one of the participants. They just want to thank all the speakers and the leaders who put this together. They just really appreciated the presentations.
Now the 7 feet is because a life-size figure generally looks a little small outside. It looks a little smaller than life size, and for a monument or something to be taken seriously, it tends to have to be at least 7 feet high. I think I've done over 100 7-foot figures, not all of Thomas Paine, but of a lot of sports figures and historical figures.
Well, you did all the sports figures out in front of the stadium.
Yeah, they're 10 feet high because, again, the stadium is so large, and they would have looked minuscule if they were life size, which is what the Phillies asked me to do at first, but I talked them into 10 feet. And a couple
of Arnold Palmer, a golfer.
Arnold Palmer. In fact, an Arnold Palmer sculpture was just given out this last week to a golfer. It's an award for golf people who play golf and give money to charity. So that award has gone to Morgan Freeman and just a lot of other people, President Clinton and quite a few other people. So that's kind of fun to know they have the sculpture.
Well, didn't you just give a bust of Ruth Bader Ginsburg to someone important?
Yeah, Hillary Clinton. She loved that because she was the one who suggested to her husband, evidently, that RBG should be on the Supreme Court. So that was nice. So it's fun, especially my love of history, when I get to meet some people who are part of it, who helped shape it. And I shaped the sculpture of historical figures, but other people actually shape history. And it's and I've always read about them, but to occasionally get to meet people is a thrill because of the artwork, because of sculpture. Sometimes they pose for me, and I've had Richard Dawkins has posed for me, and quite a few other people. Yeah, again, Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus has posed, but also other people.
Do we have any more questions?
Yeah, there's one more from Frances Rowan. I'm just gonna ask her to unmute and add her.
Hi. First, Mr. Ferdakis, have you gotten any requests for statues that you absolutely would not do? And do you have any pangs at all in your stomach as a sculptor with some of these unsavory old statues being pulled down, which I'm glad, but I know there are some people who are not so glad, but I wonder how you feel about that as a sculptor.
Okay. The first answer to the first question, yes, I have turned down some sculptures or discouraged people from hiring me to do sculptures of in fact, former presidents. And it's easier to do when you can afford to do it. I can be very, I have accepted commissions. I did one that was actually taken down that I probably wouldn't have taken if I had other work at the time, but it was my first commission of someone in a suit, and it got my career going. I was able after that to get other projects. But it wasn't, and this gets into, how do I feel about sculptures coming down? I certainly feel that Confederate generals should not be, I consider them traitors to the country. They were fighting for slavery, to support slavery, which they called states' rights. The states' rights was to have slavery. But, and so I think that, I don't see the reason for, because they're part of Jim Crow, and they were statues that were put up to let people know that, well, we lost the war, but we still are in charge. And here's, we're going to stick, here's Jefferson Davis or, other, Robert E. Lee, had slaves beaten if they tried to escape, and with a whip and glass in it and salt in the wounds and the whole bit. He wasn't such a nice person. I think that sometimes it gets a little bit, I'm concerned. I know there were a couple of pieces that were taken down in Madison. I think one of them was, the sculpture of a woman that represented a progressive
Forward.
Forward.
The title of it was Forward.
And there was a Lincoln taken down in I think that gets a little, it reminds me of the French Revolution. Once the heads start rolling, it's hard to stop. And I literally, people have knocked heads. I mean, I don't know why. One of Jackie Robinson was recently taken, knocked down. That's appalling. I think that my concern at first was that take down the worst people. Be careful about taking down some that weren't perfect, because you got to save the worst capital punishment in sculpture for the worst. If everybody gets capital punishment, it makes me think of the time when, if you stole a piece of bread, you were hanged. And then you might get to some of the others, but I think that there should be a little bit more thought about it. People have complained that sculptures shouldn't be taken down because they're part of history. But as I said, the Confederate sculptures, for example, they're only a small part of history. That's not the full story. They were Jim Crow sculptures, they're propaganda pieces. And I know as a sculptor that a lot of what I do, in a sense, is propaganda sculpture. Sometimes it's good propaganda, I like to think. I've sculpted a lot of Martin Luther King sculptures. And the last one I did is in Australia. So I know that they're not, that idea that they're just, that you're depriving people of history is not necessarily, it's not really what's going on with sculpture. But I'm just a little concerned, because the sculpture that I put up, that I had in Philadelphia early on, when someone called me, a political person from Philadelphia, said, well, we should take yours down now that we're taking down Confederate generals. And I said, maybe it should come down. And eventually I did say it should come down, because I was afraid somebody was going to get hurt, and it got taken down. But because they're trying to pull it down, they'll pull it down on themselves, or they could pull it down. They didn't realize that there was a train station underneath, and that if they pulled it off of its pedestal, they'd open up the ground and they could all fall through. So I went public and said it should come down. But my concern—
May I ask who it was?
It was Frank Rizzo in Philadelphia. Oh. And so I told people, and at the time that it was put up, the governor of Pennsylvania, the mayor of Pennsylvania at the time, Randell and others, made a speech and thought it was a good idea. A lot of people thought it was a good idea. It was my first big job, and there were a lot of reasons I did it. Part of it was, I wanted to be able to do big sculpture and so on. But, and I didn't, I just made a sculpture of him, but of course it made a lot of people uncomfortable who didn't, and I didn't vote for him when I was, here in Philadelphia through a couple of elections. Now, towards the end, he was reaching out to churches. He was racially polarizing the way Agnew was a little bit, remember? But when he ran the last time he ran, actually as a Republican, he switched over. The day he died, he had gone to an African-American church, and he was reaching out to the community to get votes, no doubt, but also perhaps he was changing as he got older. I don't know. I don't know but I didn't think he should be equated with slave owners, with Robert E. Lee and the Confederate. So he should have his day, but maybe not in the same breath. I just thought you got to save something, the worst, as I say, in taking sculptures down for the worst people. And then you go back and as they, eventually it did come around to him, and fine, because I understand that it made a lot of people unhappy to walk by him every day, on the way to work and so on. I think I don't know, he's in storage right now, and in a secret location, and he may end up somewhere in South Philadelphia in a more private area. I don't know what's going to happen with him. It's a 10-foot statue. I've done a lot of 10-foot statues since, but if I had done that one, I'm not sure how many more commissions I would have gotten. The hardest one is the first one. It's like your first million is the hardest to make. They say. I didn't make $1 million on it, but when you're an artist, if you're a musician or anything, if you don't get a stage, it's very hard to have a career. And
Philadelphia is so honored to have your most famous sculpture, Freedom.
My freedom sculpture, which again, because I survived and got to the next step, I was able to do the freedom sculpture, which was my personal statement, and the most personal statement that I've made in my sculpture of the 100 or more than 100, 150. But it's the piece that I'm best known for, and it's about 20 feet long and some figures struggling to break free. And anyway, that's what I'm most proud of. So that Philadelphia has that, and so I feel good about that. And then again, I've done a lot of sculptures of working men. I've done a working man memorial, and I've done coal mine memorials, and those generally, including the freedom sculpture, tend to be you're lucky if you break even on those, because people generally who if they're trying to honor like a coal miner, they don't usually have a lot of money. You're lucky the bronze is expensive. The people that tend to have money are the CEOs of big corporations, and it's I've been able in a way to do the Robin Hood thing where I take from the rich and I give to the poor sculptures. And so
and I can attest to that. He's been so generous and wonderful, especially with Thomas Paine and recently Ben Franklin. We're trying very hard to get Ben Franklin in the Capitol, and hopefully it will work.
Margaret's gotten some interest and for political interest, so we'll see. Yeah, it'll be great. It'd be wonderful. I created him with the fur hat so that he's the Enlightenment figure, the way he was in France with his bifocals that he invented while he was in France, and a book of an Enlightenment figure and his key from his science. So we'll see. That would be a great figure to have. There's certainly a lot of Ben Franklin sculptures, but this one is specifically kind of is a reference to the Enlightenment, I think. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the natural man, and all of that.
And France has interest in supporting this statue. So I'm trying to get an appointment with the French embassy to talk about Thomas Paine in France, and that they owe Thomas Paine some, yes, he was in prison in France for being a humanist, advocating against beheading the king. And, they thought, well, if he's not with us, he's against us. But he was a humanist.
Evidently he offended Robespierre early on, and Robespierre held a grudge. So eventually, fortunate for him that Robespierre lost his head first. But he had that problem. He felt that Washington didn't come to support George Washington, and that spoiled their relationship somewhat. I think Jefferson was helpful, showed up, and John Adams didn't seem to be very helpful, didn't like him.
It was James Monroe that saved his life, actually.
Monroe, yes.
And in fact, he lived with James Monroe for, 4 or 5 years. And then, nursed back to health. And, he was a remarkable advocate of Thomas Paine. But
the story, the story of, and you could tell of him on his way to prison. He gave this first with the age of reason to someone. So, and that they preserved it.
So. Thankfully, we have the age of reason to read and appreciate, because he had the foresight to give it to a publisher, and John Barlow, I think his name was, and it eventually got published, and he wrote, that was part 1, and then he wrote part 2 in prison. And I think it's one of the most enlightening, beautiful books that I've ever read. And I would highly recommend it to anyone.
Is there any indication that he felt that he had failed when he was dying, or that he felt like he accomplished a lot? Everything. Okay.
Yeah. He made a difference.
Go ahead, sorry.
He knew that because he was almost killed many times.
And the country rewarded him with the land in New Rochelle, right? And so he was rewarded to some degree. I think he felt like he deserved some kind of, because he didn't take money for common sense, right? He gave it away.
He started the first Bank of America with the money, the proceeds from Common Sense. That's how
Only-
generous he was.
Only because Luisa's holding on to the bitter end at 5 or 6 a.m. She has a question. Maybe we can let her ask the question quickly.
Thank you, Hyder.
I'm trying to be a humanist.
Thanks, Ida. No, it was just lightening the mood a bit about the when we were talking about the decapitations and the statues and vandalism. Fun fact, the Little Mermaid, which we are very famous for here in Denmark, she's been decapitated twice. Yeah, so and she is often seen as, you know, something you have to see when you come to Denmark, and a fantasy figure. But she's often been used throughout the years as some kind of political statement location where she's been painted, words have been painted upon her, and artifacts placed upon her, and arms removed and decapitated twice. So it's a fantasy figure, but also often a political statement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She hasn't been breaded and fried or anything, right? She's a mermaid.
Yeah, and there was underwear put onto her. She was painted, and
I saw that.
and several, I would say, not appropriate artifacts were put in her hands.
That often, yeah.
It is Denmark, after all. So
they do that with paintings. They spray paint Mona Lisa. People threw
Yeah.
things. There's that plexiglass. Somebody knocked the nose off of the Michelangelo's Madonna at one point with that broke the nose off of this with a madman, and so they restored
but
it.
she's actually tiny. Everybody thinks that when they haven't been close to her, because they've seen pictures of her next to the harbor, everybody thinks that she's quite large, but she isn't. She's tiny, tiny, tiny. So, and I was trying to look out how tall Thomas Paine was. Was he 5'8"?
Oh, as a person. Margaret, how tall was he?
6'1".
Oh, okay. Okay.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. So.
And they
okay.
described him as athletic and healthy.
Slim, yeah. So I didn't put you could see Ben Franklin less so. And out, and, yeah, he enjoyed the fruits and the vegetables of his labors and the meat.
Well, round is a shape as well. So he was in shape, but that was round.
Yes, round shape. That's good. That's good.
Louise, I'm so looking forward to seeing you in May. You can show me the Little Mermaid.
Yes. We'll have a
and
look.
I won't vandalize it.
We'll give her a pat on the head.
Oh, great. We should let you go, Louise. You must be tired.
I am. I would love to go to bed because I have a meeting at 9, which is in about 4 hours.
Wow.
So yeah, but thank you very much, and I'll go off to bed, and you have a nice evening, and thank you again for the lovely event, and looking forward to seeing the progress, Senos. So yeah.
Me too.
Bye-bye, guys.
Well, you know what? Hyder has been so wonderful. I want everyone to meet Hyder. He did the pre-event videos, the event video broadcasting. He's going to be helping me with the editing of the final version of this event. Hyder, could you please say hello and let everybody see you? Thank you.
Well, hello. I actually just want to pick up a few questions as part of my job here. But the question was, I'm presuming the statue is going to be hollow, otherwise it would be too heavy, correct?
Of course, yeah. And
Right.
if it's solid, you would waste a lot of bronze. It's not necessary. It's like bones, they're hollow, and they're
Right.
strong.
And how much will it weigh about?
It's I don't know, a few hundred pounds, not that much.
Okay.
Not that much more than he did, but bronze is here. But if it's solid too, as it cools, it would warp more where it's thicker than where it's thinner. The arm wouldn't warp as much, the body would be, because of a different density. So yeah.
Cool. I just want to say hello. I am just very honored. Margaret has been very kind to give me opportunities to volunteer with her with various projects. And I just have to say, actually, almost want to say take a beg to differ with Zenos about his own craft, because I come from an art family from Pakistan. You know, coming here from whatever background you guys want to assume, I'm obviously secular, and it's important to me when I came here that not just, especially with the Black struggle, that not just, you know, the folks themselves, but also those that were supporting, like Thomas Paine and various other people. And what I beg to differ is statues are a means of communication as we see the politics around them, you know, as we're removing them to perhaps right the wrongs, you know, why a statue is put up, you know, whether it's truth or revisionist history, all of those things stay questioned. So I hope that minus any de-anklings of your statue, and I'm sure we'll replace it, I hope that hundreds of years from now, your work will, you know, inspire people to ask who the heck that guy is. And, you know, so you are communicating.
Wait a minute, that girl.
No, I mean, Thomas Paine.
Oh,
I mean, if somebody runs into the statue post what we're about to have happen in the next 50 years.
Well, you know, that's the hope, what you're saying, that having that embodiment, which doesn't exist in Washington now, and there are a couple other places, that people will, and children and others will, because they're young enough, their minds are still forming, and they can ask their parents, who's that? And then we'll have some kind of educational element that'll explain who he is. And he was a great individual. Without him, he helped turn the much of the country towards independence with his writing. As you say, the pen being mightier than the sword or the gun. He wasn't good with the sword or the gun, evidently.
So in a way, he's an inside-out time capsule where, you know, instead of having content on the inside, the shape itself, very, you know, in shape, you know, he's able to communicate a lot. So I think Monty has a question or statement, so I don't want to keep going. I'm good. Anyway, nice to meet you guys. I'm looking forward to working more and delving more. Nice to see some folks again. And yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hyder.
It just a brief question, because it was kind of interesting. So who is that guy in the statue? And I say, are we going to provide a little information next to the statue where it talks about Thomas Paine and about other statues like the great agnostic, what is his name? Yeah, that, you know, someone can read about it if they don't know. That's it.
I need more, you know, for the new kids. I'm trying to push them to have a QR code on the side so you can scan the Thomas Paine, you know.
Yeah, I'm going to be doing that with my freedom sculpture soon.
Oh, is that real? I was kidding.
Yeah. No, I'm serious. And not only that, see, it's been scanned. And the plan is I'm supposed to have a show at the New York Institute of Technology and some other places. There's some towns that want that freedom sculpture and they can't afford it. You know, the bronze alone is hundreds of thousands of dollars just to cast it. So if people can come somewhere and use their phone or their iPad to get this code, and then they can see the sculpture in front of them in 3D, and they can have somebody go stand in it and take pictures with it. I think that's, you know, we can do that with Thomas Paine. And you can also, what the same people are doing this for me are going to, what they do for the art museum. I have a friend who did the Rocky statue. And they've created somebody, if you go there with your phone, you can see somebody appear, and then they'll talk about the sculpture and tell you about it. So we can have Margaret appear, and she can talk about it. Maybe I could talk about a sculpture. I know a little about it. And so it's, you know, gives it a little context, and it's something for the kids, but also for the adults, I guess, really.
Augmented reality is a thing.
Yeah, and one with the glasses come out, and yeah. But it's interesting, and also what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that there are many people from other countries. You were talking in the Middle East. We've had a lot of people who want freedom, and they don't want to. They're careful about what they say. Iran and other places are written, so they'll just say, "Oh, we love freedom," and we'd love to visit, but we can't. We'd like to stand in the sculpture, so we're going to make it so that they can more easily put themselves in. You know, once we create this. We use the scan so they can put themselves in it from wherever they are. And so anyway, that's kind of in the near future, very near.
Well, the line that I use with the commissioners is that the story of the founding of the United States is not complete without a monument to Thomas Paine. You know, we can point to so many things that were instrumental in not only founding the United States of America, but actually naming the United States of America. It's amazing what you can uncover when you delve into the legacy of Thomas Paine. Yeah. And I'm so proud to have Zenos involved and Hyder and all these wonderful people.
I'm thrilled to be part of this. You know, the other thing that sculpture can do, somebody saw the Shaw Memorial, and it's the sculpture in Boston of the officer that led the African Americans in the group that he led into this in the Civil War, and they made the movie Glory from that sculpture. Now maybe someone will see the Thomas Paine sculpture and it'll inspire them to do a really good biography, because there's not a really good film out there of Thomas Paine.
Well,
you can think of different actors that might be good in that role. And
we're working on a film. I am in touch with a script writer, and I'm recommending Keanu Reeves as Thomas.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah, because his life is really something like Thomas Paine, in that he is with the common person. He goes to homeless shelters. He takes the bus. He really is a humanist at heart. So yeah, I'm visualizing him as Thomas Paine.
What about this actor who just did the one of Leonard Bernstein? They had to make the nose for him, and he's from the area here, actually.
Where is he? Well, do you have an email contact for him?
He's now in California. I don't know. He comes here for games, football games, and things. But
Bradley Cooper.
Bradley Cooper was good in that. He would be a good, and he wore that nose well of Leonard Bernstein, and he looked the part.
Yeah. We want someone who exemplifies Thomas Paine.
Yeah.
I see Dom has their hand raised.
Dom.
Hi guys.
We are so excited about your presentations. You were spectacular. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much. It's really been an honor to be here in this room with you all. And as I'm listening to Zenos talk about the sculpture and just the discussion on where it's going to go in DC and all the bureaucratic thing behind that. But the fact that you gave that response, Margaret, really warmed my heart when you said, it's been exciting, but we're going forward and it's happening. And in my humble feelings and opinion, it's due to your tenacious spirit. You're very tenacious and giving an open heart. Margaret, you are an incredible human being. But isn't it very beautiful how Zenos and Margaret and so many all of us here today are talking about the humanity of Thomas Paine, are talking about how he extended himself to be a rebel at a time where his voice wasn't wanted. And we're using our humanity. That's what I think is quite beautiful. Zenos is using his hands. Margaret, you're using your spirit and your work and everything. We're all using everything we have to contribute to the collective, I guess. And I just think that is really wonderful. And I just want to extend my heartfelt love and appreciation for everyone here and experiencing this love that Thomas Paine has brought down to the annals of time, I would say. So thank you so much, Margaret. It's been an honor.
Thank you, Dom. I can't tell you how excited I was when you wanted to do a segment on each part of the letter. It was so beautifully done. It was like you had a production manager, and you are so beautiful. The kind of person I want to be friends with, best friends, I hope. And I would like to get together soon in person. And by the way, Dom is a political candidate. What is you're running for something? I can't
Yes,
remember. Just
so-
moved to California.
In California, yes, I am the state assembly candidate in California in district number 72. So I'm running to be the next state assemblywoman here, the first ever African American, African Euro American, because I'm part German. I like to acknowledge all parts of me. This is no longer the 3/5 compromise, right? So, but no, it's a wonderful privilege. We're on the ground going, and my purpose and my slogan in my campaign is unity. And you ready for this? Reason.
Oh, I just knew we hit it off perfectly. Did you notice that we had 6 co-sponsors of this event? Because my mantra is unity. We need to all work together and a common cause to be found, and that common cause is reason.
Yeah.
And common sense.
Yeah, common sense. Isn't it sad that we actually have to promote the idea that we need more reason and common sense? I mean, it's great to do it.
I know.
But what does it come to that we have to actually say, reason is a good thing?
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
And I have to say this, Zanos, in the political world, trying to champion reason and common sense, exactly what my campaign's about, as the way to go forward. You find it quite interesting how people will rebel against that to be tribal, but we have to stop doing that.
they realize it's a threat to magical thinking, and so you're doing a great thing. Good luck.
I think I'm going to call for the last questions, even though I'm on California time, Dom's on California time, several other people are, but Nina is on East Coast time, and she's hung in there with us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. I am a late night person, so this is kind of perfect event. But we have one more question from Michael, so we'll just bring him over here. And we asked you to unmute. Do you see it on your screen, Michael? One technique you can also do is you can call in on your phone and then use your phone as a mic. So I've done that a couple of times. Michael, we'll let you problem solve. I see one more hand raised from Walter. So Walter, you're on the screen now.
Hi, Walter. Thank you for hanging in with us.
Oh, it's been wonderful. Can you guys hear me?
Yes. Very well.
Oh, it's been great. I just love the music, and looking at the sculptures that you're doing, sir, is just wonderful.
Thank you.
I'm so happy to connect with you. I mean, I've been working with religious organizations, and they would spend so much time praying and trying to out Jesus themselves, rather than focusing on getting things done. Although we did. We got over 730 innocent people out of prison in Baton Rouge in 2019. I've gotten corrupt judges taken off of the benches. I'm one of the kids that marched with Dr. King in Birmingham, Alabama. So I've been a fighter for a long time. My father led a militia against the Birmingham Police and Fire Department, who were machine gunning and bombing us there in Birmingham. So I've been an activist for a long time. And I want to bring my media skill sets in, my television shows, my radio shows, which is called Progress in the World, my technical expertise to help you assuage costs and to help promote your word around the world.
Thank you so much, Walter. Are you a Louisianan?
No, I'm from Birmingham, Alabama, originally.
Oh,
but I travel the country getting innocent people out of prison. And as an abolitionist, I fought in New York. I was part of the Occupy movement. I filmed in North Dakota, Alaska. So I was one of the pioneers when it came to streaming and doing podcasts. I had my first channel in 2004, my first blog in 1998. Began working with the internet in 1976 in U.S. Navy. I was one of the button pushers and a navigator, retired in 2001. So I just want to dedicate my life to peace and fighting for reason now. And I want to be on your team. I'm in Southern California. I actually live on Canyon Lake in the city of Lake Elsinore right now.
Okay, well, you're in.
Be careful what you wish for, my man. Margaret can put anybody to work, and I'm sure a lot of heads will nod on that one.
I'm ready.
Margaret, we're going to post your contact information in the chat before we go.
Yes, please.
I'll do that.
And we so appreciate you being a part of this event and jumping in to be a volunteer. So if anyone else is listening, we want you. We need you. We are looking for volunteers, and we love to have people who are passionate and involved. And Walter, I can't thank you enough for hanging in with us. This is a long, particular event, but we hope that you've enjoyed every moment of it.
Oh, I have. It's just been tremendous. I mean, I was wondering, how am I really going to promote my skills? I just couldn't take the religious organizations anymore, that I was really involved in. Although I just selectively took projects like the project in Louisiana, down there where we got the 700 people out of prison. We went to the state capitol steps and we filmed them telling their stories about false arrest. I mean, they have 7-year-old kids in prison there in solitary confinement. They have guards riding horses with shotguns, and Black men and white men and Latino men, mostly Black, picking potatoes out of the ground in the winter with their bare hands. They don't even give them a spatula, anything. Their fingers are bleeding from digging in this frozen ground. So this is the type of atrocity that we still have occurring. It's just like, the old enslaved days.
Thank you so much for enlightening us. You're bringing me to tears. Hyder has his hand raised.
I just wanted to say, Margaret, how my story is very similar from a different perspective as Walter's. I would love to, sir, I'd love to, trade some contact info and share some notes, because I think we could at least help each other think about our trajectories.
Can you guys hear me now?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay, sorry about that.
Michael.
Hi, Michael. I think you're going to be the last person to speak.
Okay, I just wanted to say sorry. I don't know about the audio. I don't want to waste time talking about what I just did. I couldn't figure it out. But hello, and thank you, Margaret, so much for putting this on, and Zenos for doing this statue. That is awesome. I mean, I'm 53 years old, and I've just been doing, the best I can to learn and share the best truth I can too. I mean, I think we all are, according to how much time we have and whatever. But I really enjoyed the music that was here tonight. That was great. And before we go, I just wanted to say, in case anyone didn't know, you can look on the chat screen on the right side. Of course, click chat at the bottom of this screen to make the chat window go open. And then you can look at the bottom of the chat screen, and you see those symbols in the left corner. On the right side of those symbols are 3 little dots. If you click those 3 little dots, you can click Save Chat, and it'll save all of this text in a text file in your Documents Zoom folder. And I just want to let y'all know that. So click those 3 little dots, click Save Chat, and it'll save all that in your Documents Zoom folder.
What an excellent thing to convey. Thank you.
And I love you all, and I'm going to get out of here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right.
Great advice. Well, I can't thank everyone enough for their participation, their help. It's been a wonderful event, and I thank you, Hyder, Nina, Zenos, so many people that I want to thank. But right now, I guess I need to say goodbye and see you next time. And again, I appreciate everything, every passion that you have for Thomas Paine. I thought I was all alone for a while, but tonight I've experienced a lot of love and appreciation. So thank you.
Well, Thomas Paine thought he was alone too, but not now.
True, true. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Night.